Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Program and Personnel Committee meeting for March 13th, 2023. We will call this meeting to order, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Like to start with first agenda item is the invitation for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the Program of Personnel Committee? Yeah, come right on. Just state your name and just as our common practice is 3 minutes. We're a little looser in the committee meetings, but
okay, I'm Angie Naylor. I'm a Spanish teacher at Vernon Hills High School. I was a teacher at Libertyville High School for 15 years prior. I'm in like my 23rd year or something. And I'm the one who wrote the letter regarding the language lab. So I just wanted to share that as you are having your discussion, if you have any questions, there are many language teachers here, and we would be so happy to answer any questions that you have.
okay, thank you. That is... Yeah, okay. Anyone else wishing to address the committee? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on. First item on the agenda is the IHSA membership renewals. This happens every year.
The price is right. I had not gotten that news that they were not charging their members this year, but that's
They haven't been charging a few years, number of years, but this is our normal annual membership renewal for both Libertyville High School and Vernon Hills High School.
Okay, any questions from the board? Pretty straightforward. We do this every year. Allows our participation in IHSA. So that will be on the agenda for the board meeting later this month. All right, next on the agenda, ombudsman agreement.
So ombudsman, we will recommend at the board meeting for approval of the alternative education service agreements for 23-24. So we've had a longstanding agreement with ombudsman to provide some off-campus program for our students. And so they request us in the agreement to look at the number of seats to pay for the year. And we can also, after that, if there's still room in at ombudsman, that we could add students in there, but it's, you know, a little higher cost. And so we contracted last year for 2 students. We've used our allotment of 2 students. So we're asking for another 2 students for next year reserve spots.
Okay, any questions or comments on this? Again, most of us have seen this before. So this is a minimum of 2 students. So we pay for the first 2 students, no matter what.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that will be also on the agenda later this month. Moving right along. Annual certified staff employment recommendations. It's that month.
So in the agenda, I did try to provide with you a timeline going back to the beginning of the year of the sectioning process. You know, that it started back in the fall with finalizing our curriculum proposals and the courses into then starting the process of course selection with our students. So in January through February, our course selection for our current students 9 through 11, but also then our 8th grade students selecting courses. Once the course selection is done, then the schools, the buildings get together and look at the students that have signed up for the courses, the number of courses, And then they start to look at the number of sections that we should have for each of our courses. And the number of sections are based off of our optimum class sizes, which were updated in this contract. They're included in Appendix F of the teacher union contract. So the buildings go through that process as a team. They work together with their department chairs, building administration. Then we as a district all meet together. So both Libertyville, Vernon Hills, and we evaluate the number of sections for each of those departments. And again, looking at the optimums and holding to those optimums. There's a number of factors that go into looking at the number of sections that we select. When you look at, there are some year-long courses. There are also some semester courses. There are also larger courses and some smaller courses. And so sometimes we have to make some tough decisions on whether or not a course will run, depending on the enrollment that is in there. So our optimums, the big change this year is a lot of our optimums, some of them that were 28 moved to 25, and some of our courses that might have been 18 or 22, some of the AP courses moved up to 25. So for the most part, most of our courses were 25. There are some other courses in physical education and some of our other courses that might be bigger or smaller. So once you have the number of students and you try to keep as close to that divisor optimum as possible, then we determine the number of sections. Again, going back to, there were some tough decisions to make that if 8 students sign up for a course, it's tough for us to run a semester course with 8 students. There were times that we did look at a couple of our courses, and what we call is we stack the courses. So if we have 2 courses that are very similar and low number of students, if the teacher is able to teach both sections in there, we try to keep those courses going if possible. We do have one course that is taught across the district. So Calculus 3 currently is taught across the district. It's dual credit course, and we have one teacher that is teaching both our Vernon Hills and Libertyville students. And so, once all of the sectioning is done, now behind sectioning, there becomes people and our teachers, and we look at, our full-time equivalent or our teachers and who can teach the courses, taking in again to account the teachers that are retiring. So obviously they're not part of determining who will be teaching the courses. When we looked at that and finished everything, this year again, the last few years we've been working on trying to get our numbers broken down into different areas. And so I thought this year, we broke it down into classroom full-time equivalent, general education. So classroom full-time equivalent in some of our intervention and services. So EL, PAWS, special services, which was instruction and co-teaching, and then also transition pathways. And then our non-classroom full-time equivalent, or FTE, which was our non-instructional assignments, student services, which includes our LST, special services, non-instructional. So you're looking at social worker, psychologist, and then again, transition pathways. So when we finish with all of the sectioning, our total FTE change in the classroom was down a 0.9. And for our classroom FTE and intervention services, so EL, PAWS, special services, transition pathways, our total FTE was up 0.2. And then non-classroom full-time equivalent, we are up 1.5 in that area. And so some of the other, so when you look at overall then for our teaching assignments, we were up 0.8 for our staffing. So we realized that although some of the course requests had declined. So if you look at Libertyville High School, there is course requests down 440 course requests. And Vernon Hills course requests were down 22. So although there was a declining in course requests, some of it was due to, declining enrollment at both buildings, but it's also what the students choose and how many classes they choose. So although we were down, we were really only down 0.9 for classroom FTE. Part of that was we knew that with some of the changes in optimums, that the classes going from 28 to 25, there would be a slight increase in the FTE. So even though we were down 440 here at Libertyville, students receiving special education services, there was we project an increase of 23 for next year. And then our students receiving EL, we have an increase of our EL services for next year. Now, we did make some changes to EL with some overload and some other additions through this year. And so we think that we are in a good place with the structure of our EL at both schools. If we do get any enrollment over the summer, but if we have another big bump like we did this past summer with some of our move-ins from Ukraine, we may have to make some, adjustments, but we're hoping that, we don't have that big of an increase there in EL.
Yeah, we used the predictors that we normally have in terms of the trend over the last 5 years. So last year was a much larger jump. So we built in some cushion room in our EL classes, but didn't want to predict who the move-ins were going to be. So just to foreshadow that there may be a request in July or August for additional EL staffing.
We find these increasing all year long though, don't we? Like we have kids that are moving into district every week. So it's kind of hard to plan. So I appreciate the buffer because I'm hearing from friends in other districts that it's just a continual increase in the numbers of students and trying to find ways to get people to accommodate. They may have actually finished their year in their previous school and yet they have to go to school. So good.
And if you recall, this past year, we added 2 aides in our EL program. So luckily we were able to find, Russian speaking aid and also a Spanish speaking aid to add. But again, we had some overloads with our instructors in EL. And so we made some changes there at both schools. And we're hoping maybe that, again, we don't have that big increase over summer. If we do, we'll try to get on it right away though. So. Any questions on that staffing portion before we go on to kind of the employment piece?
Just a general question, but have all students who applied to be in a class, have they all gotten that class right now? Or do we still have a population of students who may not get into the classes they wanted to sign up for?
So that's a good question. So if the buildings recognize that maybe classes weren't going to run, just the enrollment was so low, like 5 students had signed up for a class. They were going back to the students right away and try to get them into other sections so that when we really did the sectioning, that there's not going to be movement now here in the spring or summer of those students. So we were trying to capture that so that if we section something at 24 students, that students in an elective that didn't get piled into a class, and then that class optimum increase. So we were trying to catch those sooner rather than later this year.
Okay,
So those questions, just to be clear, those conversations with students have already taken place.
Correct.
One level of
Yeah.
them. There's
Yeah.
a few more classes. I would say the buildings did a really good job projecting and internally deciding which classes they knew couldn't run. But there were a few more added to the list. But the other area where students sometimes have to make choices is when there's conflicts, when we actually build the master schedule. And German 4 is offered the same time as some other singleton, even though we try to not do that with, you know, an 8-period day, it's impossible. So that's one more round where students unfortunately are asked to make a choice between class A and class B.
Yeah, there's certain, when Denise says singletons, you know, if you sign up for geometry, there might be 8 sections of geometry throughout the day. It's easier to fit into a student schedule. But if they sign up for a certain art class, it might only be offered once during the day. And once that schedule is built, sometimes it's hard to piece that student's schedule around, and they may not be able to get that. And so then, you know, may have to move their schedule around.
Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking about it. There are some classes you can only take in a certain year. Like I think health has to be taken freshman year, and you can only take AP government in senior year. I may be getting some of these specifics wrong, but are we like making sure that these students for those types of requirements that they can get into those classes at the right time?
As far as I know, I think of the classes that have low enrollment, it typically are some of the specialty classes. And so we try to, as the school counselors especially, work hard at this, making sure students know what is a close alternative. But anything that would be in a sequence, we make sure that the student either has that path or a path that's similar in terms of graduation requirements or something else.
Thank you.
I just want to, first of all, thank you for putting all this together. Just deciphering this, I can't imagine how much information goes into just creating this, but I want to make sure I understand it. Even though we're down 1 or 0.9 FTE through the contingency, we're not going to see a change in our staffing. Is that right? Is that why we have the 1 FTE contingency?
So that one FTE contingency was like this past year when we added some EL. In the past, I know we've added a math section over the summer at Vernon Hills. So if like we have some move-ins in an area or we need to add, so that contingency is in case we need to add, that we don't have to come back to the board and say, and ask for. So we're asking for a 1.0 contingency, which allows us that if we need to add an overload or add a teacher, some sections, that we can do that without having to come to the board.
Just to be clear, it's not somebody we're hiring. It's somebody, it's a placeholder in case.
It's budget
we do need
reserve.
to hire.
Right.
Yeah.
To not eliminate an FTE.
Right,
based on-
right.
Right.
Anything else? Okay, part B of the,
So then
Staffing.
the next piece that we all work on together, so department chairs work with their teachers on what courses you know they would like to teach for next year. And then with the building administration with us. And so once we plug all that in, obviously there are FTE. So again, 1.0 FTE is that a teacher is teaching 5 classes first semester and 5 second semester. So really 0.5 and 0.5. So that adds up to 1.0 FTE. So that's where you get the 1.0 FTE. You know, there are a couple of things in here when you look at like non-instructional assignments. So for example, our data coaches, our equity coaches in the building, you know, they'll teach 3 classes and they have 2 assignments off. So there'll be a 0.6 teacher with a 0.4 release and a non-instructional. So that's where you get, you know, these different points of FTE, which is different than like middle school or grade school where you have a 3rd grade teacher and they teach 3rd grade or something like that. And so when we go through the staffing, again, there was a decrease in FTE for general education, but increases across the board. So our recommendation is for continued employment of our 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year teachers. The 4th year teachers would also then be recommended for tenure. And again, you would take action on this in the board meeting. We do have honorable dismissal of full-time faculty, which is, again, by law, you have to do this so many days before the end of the school year. And the only full-time, we had 2 leave of absences that were covered by staff members. They knew that they were covering 1 year of absence. Although we hired them to cover a leave, legally, we still need to release them from their job. So again, they've had conversations that they will be released from their positions. The other part that the board needs to take action on at the board meeting is non-renewal of part-time faculty. So a part-time faculty member is anyone under 1.0. It could be 0.9 or it could be 0.1, but anyone under 1.0 is considered a part-time. And so by law, you have to release them. And some people call it, part-time RIF, but it's a reduction in force. So again, they've had conversations from their department chair to the building that they will be receiving a legal notice from you. So at the board meeting, you will take action to release our non-tenured teacher. Some of them may be coming back in positions, and if they're coming back in open positions, some of them are part-time positions that they may be offered. You would rehire them again in April. So then we go and talk to them and see what sections are available to them, and then we hire them again in April. And part-time doesn't allow you to start your process of earning tenure also. So just so you know that the tenure process in Illinois under para could be, it's normally 4 years. You can get accelerated tenure with 3 years, with 3 years of excellent. You could get also accelerated tenure with portability if you were tenured at another school with 2 years. But part-time teachers do not earn any of that process toward.
Okay, any questions?
I have a quick one.
Sure.
So this is for certified faculty.
Mhm.
And so I guess when does the window close for notification of potential RIF? So I'm just confirming that
45
this
days before the
end of the school year.
Yeah.
So this is not necessarily, is this final?
So then we, at board action, you would take at next week.
I
So if-
suppose what I mean is this list isn't anticipated to change before next
It is
week.
not going to change.
Okay. And then my other question is, do we get a staffing report similar to this for our non-certified staff, our paras, I can't remember from last year?
We'll have that at the April board meeting.
Cool, thank you.
Good questions. Anything else? Okay, moving on, we have employment of employees.
This is just our March personnel report for employment of employees.
Any questions on these? These will be included in the consent agenda.
Correct.
Okay. Moving on to letter F, educational tours.
I will say it's nice to see that we were able to hire someone for specialized
Yeah.
support so quickly, because we just approved that.
Yeah, good point. Okay. We have 3 educational tours.
Yes, and this is the first year that we participated in the DECA competition at Libertyville, and one student was selected to participate at the national competition in Orlando. So they will be going to that in April, and that is the International Career Development Conference. And then we have students going to the state conference for Future Business Leaders of America in Springfield, and we also have a net tour plan for our French-speaking students for 2024 to Canada.
Okay, any questions on that?
Just a comment that I was happy to see the Canada tour back on the agenda. I know that my daughter went on that one and it was a fabulous tour. So just happy to see, continue to see these come back. So.
Okay. Hearing no other questions, we'll move on. Next, those will be on the agenda for the board meeting later in the month. Item G, gender support model overview.
So good afternoon, all members of Board of Education and to our D128 community, our staff, administration. I am here today along with some members of the dynamic gender support. I know I have Mr. Gore. I think that's it. I think it's just me and him today. that worked hard on updating the gender support model. So again, special thanks to all of our members that participated on the committee. They helped to create a space in which all of the members, including students and parents that participated on the committee, were able to share their experiences as well as contribute and challenge at times, and be able to learn from each other. In addition to helping me to review different documents, as well as the presentation, and then also some accompanying documents that we still have to finalize.
Next slide, I think.
Yep, next slide. Yep, next slide from that one. All right, so I want to give a special shout out to the student members of the committee. I really want to illuminate their participation in this process. It was absolutely amazing to be in a room with students that advocated for students that are currently with us, as well as students that will be joining us in years to come. But also to be courageous to share their voice with something that is not all the way accepted, in which, where it really needs to be. I also want to thank the Libertyville High School Gender Sexuality Alliance, as well as the Vernon Hills Sexuality and Gender Acceptance Club, for allowing me the space to come in and also speak with those students as well. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to give a little bit of a background on where the gender support plan came from. So back in 2019, Governor Pritzker put together a committee entitled Strengthening Our Commitment to Affirming Inclusive Schools. And his order for this task force was to create some type of guidance for districts to support their gender, their non-conforming, transgender, intersex, I know I'm forgetting one, non-binary, and students questioning their gender to support, as well as to ensure that there was no discrimination towards these students. In 2020, right before COVID hit, the task force presented recommendations in which there's now ISB guidance specifically for this. However, I want to point out that D128 formed a committee back in 2016 and to create a gender support guidance, as well as a gender support plan that was used district-wide. So we were actually, well, you guys were actually ahead of the curve. All right, so you'll hear me say gender support plan and gender support model, but we are going with the alignment of what ISB would like us to call it. So it's the gender support model, and it is a framework to support our transgender, non-binary, and our gender non-conforming students according to each of their needs thoughtfully and intentionally, with looking at 4 factors. Providing tailored support to ensure equal access to educational programming and activities, recognizing all risk factors, keeping in mind the student's chronological and developmental age, as well as family supports that may affect the process. And then, if requested and if needed, providing supports to siblings or other family members that may be also attending the school district. Next slide, please. All right, so I also want to include in this history, a history of where we're at in this alignment to our strategic plan and our equity policy. And as the great Larry Vaughn, who is sitting with us today, says, all means all. And we want to make sure that we are supporting all of our students. And so here again is our equity policy, which also focuses on our students. You can go to the next slide. And then our vision, which says that every child feels seen, heard, and included, which is something that we wanted to make sure that we were doing in this process. And then championing opportunities for every student to be daring. Please go to the next slide. And then again, just a reminder for the board and our community of our D128 equity commitments. Next slide. All right, so our D128 gender support model is designed to provide procedures to address the needs of our transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary, and intersex students. Within the guidelines, we focus in on professional development for our staff. We focus in on student records, as well as making sure that within the guidelines and our procedures that we are creating a culture free of harassment, discrimination, and bullying. Next slide, please. So we had four pillars of focus, I would like to say. We wanted to make sure that we supported our LGBTQ plus and affirming student groups. We wanted to provide easily accessible information and supports and make sure that they are communicated to all. We wanted to ensure accountability for inclusive practices. And then again, as I stated before, provide ongoing training and support to all staff members. Next slide. All right, so before you are components of the gender support model that were previously included in the gender support guidance that was created in 2016. With these components, we just updated and or aligned each of the areas to what was created in the ISB guidance. So some of the areas it was stayed the same, and then in other areas we made that alignment to the ISB guidelines. Next slide. So what's new? What was not included in our 2016 gender support plan that we included in our model are the 6 areas of focus here. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to focus on some of what I would like to call needs or hot topics for our gender support plan. So one component that is a new addition is overnight field trips. There was definitely a need for guidance for our students and staff in this area to provide supports and accommodations for overnight trips in respect to our transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary, and intersex students, as well as those questioning their gender. So within this area, we provide specific procedures as well as communication structures for overnight field trips for our students. Another area of focus, which was not included in the support in the gender support guidance of 2016, was staff in transition. Our 2016 guidance only focused in on students, and we wanted to expand this to include our staff or any incoming staff as we look at continuing to diversify our staff. And so we wanted to make sure that there was language to ensure that our employees' career, social and emotional success. Another area that we felt that there was a need to expand was our training and professional development. And this is training and professional development that will be provided to all staff. And we will focus in on 4 areas: terms, concepts, and current developmental understandings of gender identity, gender expression, and gender diversity in children and adolescents. Developmentally appropriate strategies for communication with students and parents about issues related to gender identity and gender expression that protect students' privacy. developmentally appropriate strategies for preventing and intervening in harassment, intimidation, discrimination, and bullying incidents, including cyberbullying. And then last but not least, classroom management practices, curriculum resources that educators can integrate in their classrooms to help foster a more gender inclusive environment for all students. Last but not least, another area that the committee felt was very important was the new facilities and additions. There was a firm agreement that there should be consideration of additional non-gender bathrooms and or facilities that should be included in any discussion and or plans of new additions to existing building structures. Next slide. So moving forward, our team will finalize the gender support model. We also have to finalize some accompanying documents that go along with the model. We also would like to finalize our advocacy plan, and then we will prepare to communicate this with all parties. We will share this out with Vernon Hill Saga and LHS GSA. We also will provide training to our LST teams. In August during Institute Day, we hope to provide training to D128. And then last but not least, update our websites, including resources. And then as a team, just really talk about the accessibility and the communication and how we can get better to make sure that this is known by all. Before I open this up for questions and discussions, Mr. Gore, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Very fine. Summary of what we did.
All right. With that being said, do you have any questions or
In the previous
comments?
slide, just, I'm not sure what finalize the advocacy form means. What is
Mhm.
that?
So the advocacy form is something that we discussed. It is a form that initially, when we talked about it, would be given to our students to identify like what their pronouns are, what their preferred name would be, and what supports. As the team started talking about that, we expanded that to include a form that will now not only cover those areas, but then also can be given to all of our students to identify those who may be in need of mental health supports or may need some social emotional supports, and students that may have some financial deficits and that may need help on trips or different things within the school.
So it would be more general to
Yes.
provide a wide range. of
Absolutely.
supports.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
On the same slide, again, this is really good work. So good job, everyone. The question I have was, it says finalize the gender support plan. So is the idea here that the student has their own individualized student support plan and whatever documents that go with it? Is that how I should interpret that?
Yes, so one of the components of the model is actually a gender support plan in which the students will work with a gender support team, which will be members of their LST, and then an adult who they may have a very close connection with that they want to have there in the meeting to support them. And in this plan, it is very specific to their needs to support them within within all areas of the building. So if within the classroom, within the lunchroom, doing extracurricular activities, as well as during after-school events, such as homecoming or driver's ed, or any areas that we may have not thought of, including overnight trips as well too.
Thank you.
And when will this process be finalized?
So we will continue working on the plan and the accompanying documents. The other document, in addition to the advocacy plan, is an overview of what the gender support teams should look like, expectations, And then it's some guidance in regards to how to set up those meetings, what should be discussed. So my plan is to finalize this with our social workers that were on the team. Just haven't had time to do that yet. And then I anticipate this being completed and done by April. Yeah, our intention is for this to be ready to go for 23-24.
Super.
Does the advocacy forum also serve as like a referral piece?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess that was kind of that leads to my next question. It may be just unclear from the presentation, but maybe you just have the info. So I guess, how do students and families seek support other than coming to their LST and social worker? How do they initiate these kind of supports? Like for students who are encountering this perhaps for the first time as they set foot into our doors of our schools, you know, I guess, how does this plan support the growth of that awareness of services available for families and individual students? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So with the advocacy forum, we are in discussion about how this advocacy forum can be provided to all students at the beginning of the year. And it'll be a Google form that will, where the students will ask certain questions, and then based on their answers, it would just direct them to the next question. So if a student is not in need of supports because they're part of the LGBTQ plus or gender affirming, then it will skip them to mental health and supports or skip them to financial. And then we plan to take this, and then there are some questions on the form that if they are in need of supports, then it will funnel to a counselor or a member of the LST. And then we'll be able to provide information to the LSTs as well as, if needed, to the students' teachers as well too.
So is this like something that happens during registration? Is it?
So
part of
we're talking about whether we should do it in registration, whether we should give the form within the first couple of weeks of school. So that's one of the details that we still have yet to decide on what's best.
And is it something that goes out to individual students, or does it go to families?
It goes to the students. Yeah, it'll go to the students.
Okay, other questions, comments? A lot of tremendous work, just there's so much going into this. And I would comment, it says finalize the gender support model. I would say, yes, we'll finalize it as it is now.
Yeah.
This will be an ongoing process. There will
Yes.
be so much more that we find out as we go through this journey, and as you've already, uncovered new things as we go. So I'm excited that we're on the journey and we're keeping a focus on it, so that we do recognize those things as we move forward. So thank you for
We
your work.
plan on providing, doing an update to this model every 2 years. So really trying to create a structure to do so. But thank you so much to each and every one of you for this time to present this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is, I think, what a number of folks are interested in hearing about, the language lab update. So,
Yes. So the language lab at LHS was discontinued at the end of the 2021 school year. Then it was decided that the Vernon Hills Language Lab would be discontinued at the end of the 2022-2023 school year. So that is the recommendation that we are presenting, or will be presenting. I wasn't here when the decision was made, so I don't have a lot of the background information on that. I'm told our district historian, Mr. Brian Kelly, will have more of that information.
When we, just a little bit of history too, in 1920 was when we finished the school year under COVID. So we came back in the fall of 2020. We were remote at that time. And so we did not have the language lab at that time, and both of our language lab personnel were assigned in other areas at that time. Now, a little history of the language lab going back before that. was that we had language labs. And this is some of the information I got from our schools, different software. Over time, obviously, that software has developed and changed. We went from the computers to iPads, and then the College Board in spring of 2021. So now we came back to school in 20 to 21. And if you remember in 20, all of our students at that point were one-on-one with Chromebooks. We had Chromebooks. The College Board had developed some a DAC Chromebook app, which we manage with our IT. When we had our discussions in that spring of 21, so the decision was made that we were going to shift away from using our language labs, and Libertyville was ready to make that decision much sooner. They didn't have the language lab in 2020-21, and they wanted to reutilize that space as an innovation space for all of our staff. So they were ready to make that decision going into the 21-22 school year, and made that decision much sooner. And Vernon Hills at that time said that they would be transitioning into phasing out the language lab, that they were not ready though for the 21-22 school year, and that they would phase that out. And fast forward to, this year is when we're looking at, phasing the language lab out for next year.
So I just have a basic question and a naive question. What exactly is happening currently in the Vernon Hills Language Lab in terms of how, how does students access that and what happens?
I can talk about that. I first want to make sure that I say in public that our language teachers make really meaningful use out of the lab. There's no doubt about that. The language lab is used primarily for teachers to drop in. So there's a room that stays open. There's an ESP member who staffs it 5 days a week, 8 periods a day. And teachers sign up for sections, and almost every one of our language lab teachers uses it. The students come in, and based on the teacher's goals for the lesson, they have worked with the ESP member, Radhika Joshi, who's fantastic at what she does. She's highly skilled. She's got the interface set up at the front of the classroom. The teachers move in, they sit at individual workstations. Most of the time they put on headphones with also microphones, and then they go through a series of exercises, sometimes listening and responding. Sometimes those responses are recorded. Sometimes they are literally speaking with another student, maybe across the room or somewhere in the vicinity that they don't necessarily know or isn't necessarily sitting right next to. Those can be recorded. The teachers then have the ability to go back and assess the student's ability to both understand, comprehend, and speak the language. And so I think instructionally, what I think these teachers are here probably to say is there's value in that. And as a principal, I've never said there isn't. I don't think anyone has said there isn't value with that. I think over time, our language lab continues to be used. And I can't speak for Libertyville's, but there has over time become this imbalance in programs. And so Vernon Hills is spending X amount of dollars every few years to upgrade the computers, every few years to upgrade the software. There's of course user agreements with the software, and we employ an ESP member to run that thing. Yeah, I think that answers the question of what the lab is used for. I think the question then becomes, so now all of these students that we have one-on-one devices, one-to-one devices, right? They all carry Chromebooks. And as I talked to Eva and Angie about this, for a teacher to facilitate that in a classroom, the answer, it can happen, but it's going to be different. Right now, the ESP members at the front of the room is controlling the action, right? Is pressing a button and every student hears the exact same prompt at the exact same time. The students don't have to worry about navigating that in their software or trying to, mess with their Chromebooks to try to get it. Obviously, the privacy of the classroom with the stalls, you can't necessarily replicate that in a classroom. So there are some differences, but I think what I have challenged Tammy Black over the years, because to Brian's point, we have gone to bat and supported this language lab for several years, knowing that probably there was going to be a shift in that. But we've been encouraging our leaders in that language area for years to try to find a different technology that might be able to be used with the Chromebooks, since every student has a Chromebook. And I know that Jenny Getch and Tammy Black continue to work on that. That won't probably be free. There'll probably be some cost to the software package just for that on a Chromebook. I don't think that's, there might be a subscription, but that still has yet to come. But in fairness to Bryant, we were told last year, and I did tell Tammy Black, like, this is probably going to be the last year for the language lab. And so she has known that. And I think the teachers are probably here to say, we would love to keep it. But we do understand that we were told that last year and then moved ahead accordingly. So.
And I don't know who can speak to this, but what is LHS doing? Because I'm assuming, successfully phased it out. So what did LHS replace it with? I don't know. John, I don't expect you to be able to speak to that. No, that wouldn't be your.
Yeah, I don't have that.
No. Whoever can answer the question, absolutely. Yeah, could you go to the podium though, because we have people who are listening to the live stream. And if you're not speaking in the microphone, they won't be able to hear what you're saying.
Yes, so I was not at LHS when they didn't phase it out. So in the letter that I wrote to the board, I explained that LHS decided the teachers weren't part of the decision, but somebody at LHS decided to switch to an iPad model, where I think the vision of the space was that it was a collaborative space where students could work on, one group could work on interpersonal speaking, and I don't know, it was supposed to be a collaborative space. So they got rid of their old model of the lab and put in an iPad model, and the software it didn't work. I think that they lost their lab aid. The teachers weren't trained in how to use it. It just simply didn't work. And I think that teachers stopped going to the lab and the iPads were taken out. So I don't know if that sounds like that's the accurate rendition of what happened. So the teachers didn't decide they didn't need the lab. It just was taken away from them and iPads were put in the place. So that's why it's extra difficult for us at Vernon Hills to know, LHS is using the materials that they have in the classroom, and that's fine. It's really not the same at all. And I think that many of the teachers from LHS would say, we want our old lab back. We didn't choose the iPads.
I'm certainly not going to argue that point, but without having that actual information.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm not diminishing your credibility whatsoever, but
no,
speaking for LHS or for the LHS teachers is probably not the best way for us to get that
probably true.
information.
I don't know if any of them sent any letters or information to you.
But Yesenia, Dr. Sanchez did speak about this with Ray
and Jenny.
So I'd like maybe her to give an update of a recent conversation with both of them.
Yeah, so I think there's difference in opinions on whether the lab at LHS is successful or not. I can certainly prepare something for our next meeting just to detail that out. But I do think that if you were to ask them, they'll tell you that the software on the iPads they feel is working for them, and their teachers are starting to use in the classrooms.
So I don't want to overemphasize
the success of the LHS lab in having made this decision? Because as I understand it,
There are no iPads there anymore. It's gone.
No,
understood, thank you.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is that we're not looking to re-examine the decision, because we've already approved a budget for next year that doesn't include the lab. So we're not saying go back and get more information so that we can make that decision over again, because we've already approved that budget. And that's done mainly through the department and the building, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I'm saying we can get some clarity so that we can support the model transition at Vernon Hills.
So you're saying, what did LHS find that was helpful or
That
would
worked.
have been helpful?
Mhm.
Do that kind of an audit and then make sure we provide that and anything else. So Vernon Hills teachers feel supported in the transition.
Correct.
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, and I'm only speaking for myself, so please speak up. Ultimately, the board wants to approve whatever is going to be the successful model. So we're not passing judgment on what we want to approve and what we don't want to approve as a board level budgetary decision. I guess what we do is we approve the final budget, but all of the decisions made at the granular class level, department level, building level, those are made before those things get to the board.
But we do want assurances that the students are being supported. If we've taken one service away,
Correct.
how are we supporting them going forward, and is that effective? That is something we want to know. However you choose to provide that information, because right now, I'm not comfortable that that is what's happening. So.
Sure. So I can work with Joe and Ray and prepare with a proposal.
Yeah, and I would echo that and from the perspective of if there's something that we've overlooked along this process and remembering that a lot of these decisions were made in a pretty chaotic time and have been, delayed and the implementation of those decisions has been done in sort of a prolonged manner. So we don't have at our fingertips the reasons and the decision making, all the data that went into the original decision. But to ensure, the one thing we can do is moving forward to ensure that those students are going to have appropriate supports, and if it's to look at what's happening at LHS and learn from that, or if it's something else, I think we just need to be comfortable that as we make this transition and we make this change, that there's going to be some positive outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the
And the
learning that's
learning-
happening at Libertyville using, the Chromebook app that, Jenny can work with Tammy and can put things in place, and Joe and Ray work together to ensure that the transition from, moving from the language lab to not having the language lab, that our teachers can be supported in that process.
Yeah, I think
I mean, we're
the
seeing
bottom
it.
line
I
is.
think we're sitting in a position to have the benefit of seeing what has been successful versus can it be successful. So prior to making anything final, I would, if they were given those services and those opportunities, how, again, it would be important to see how LHS has transitioned from that to the same level of success that they had with the language lab.
Right.
It seems like they were ready to make that transition, so they should be able to speak to that.
Right, and whatever is going to serve the student learning
Right.
best is what we'd like to make sure is implemented. And if there's costs associated with that, then we'll have that conversation.
Can I ask just a background question? I know Bryant went into it a little bit, but what was the original, I guess, logic behind just getting rid of the physical labs? I understand iPads or Chromebooks kind of became available. I think maybe the usefulness of a physical lab became kind of obsolete with the pandemic, and it sounds like LHS kind of shifted models successfully. But I guess what I'm asking is, what was the initial driver? Were the language labs cost prohibitive? Were they space prohibitive?
I think there was a combination, in talking to, the building, that the way it was situated with the, what they looked at the time was the corrals that were set up. That, the corrals kind of isolated the students. We did have software, in the labs. We had hardware that we had to, update. But it really, the functionality of the room too, by opening it up, it allowed other classes, so not just language classes, to be able to use spaces, in the school. And they just felt that over time with the change in some of the software, so the software went from a SANS lab, Sony Soloist software to the iPad software to the Chromebook software, that I think just with the technology changes over the years, that they were able to still do some of the things that they were able to do.
And then can I ask another question kind of as a follow-up? Do we know of any of the just maybe Yesenia can speak to this. I don't know how much information exists without having a member of the World Languages Department from LHS here, but what are the current limitations on that iPad software or Chromebook software, what have you, that don't match the functionality of the current language lab setup?
I think that's something that we'll have to get from LHS.
I am a languages teacher at LHS, so I don't know if you have any questions specifically for me, but I can answer questions that you have.
If you could shed light on that, I think that would just paint a picture, and I don't want to speak for the board, but for me, when we're comparing the original lab setup with desktop computers, study carrels, etc., versus an iPad model or Chromebook model with this newer software, what are the limitations of that software you've noticed as a world languages teacher? How has that either added value or detracted value from your experiences with a language lab, be it in the lab physically or within your own classroom? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I can give my opinion if that's
Perfect.
if that's what you're interested in. We really did enjoy the old model with the carols because that gave the best recording and it gave the best experience for the student talking, not hearing the person next to them. It isn't the best for having a conversation, but that's what we do in the classroom. So the reason that we would go to the lab would be to do these recordings, and that was the best quality recording that we could get. So once we had the iPads, we no longer had the carols, and we no longer had that advantage of that recording.
And I'm sorry to get down to the nuts and bolts here of this. I'm just really trying to put myself in the place of a student and a teacher, but headphones recording with a mic, right?
Mhm.
Are those typically student provided, school provided?
Yeah, the students had that too, but then we no longer had control over the iPad, so we couldn't start the recording at the same time. So although we ask our students to please be logged in at the same time and to start at the same time, that doesn't always, it's not as easy as it is when you're in the lab and you can control that.
Yeah,
Does that
in
make sense?
practice, not necessarily a good use of time or instruction.
Right, and we no longer have the iPad, so now we're just using the Chromebooks right
Chromebooks.
now. And we don't really have an app that's on there. We use mostly a service called Flipgrid. And that doesn't work all that well all of the time. I've asked my students for feedback on that, and the last time I asked them, 90% of them said they had problems with it sometimes or all of the time.
So I'm hearing that perhaps the software in place currently is not maybe the best fit for our teachers and students.
It is not working as well as the lab used to work.
By your, yeah.
Okay.
By your measure, from your vantage, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and then my other question again, kind of goes back to the headphone piece, because I'm just thinking what with all the new technology we have available with noise cancellation and things like that, are there other options perhaps we haven't explored that could potentially allow for better recording, less interference?
We do have some headphones that are available for the students that we have purchased, but they are, I don't know how high quality they are. they are working when the sites are working.
May I just make a statement?
What?
To me, it sounds like there's maybe some optionality that hasn't been considered, some cooperative or collaborative solutions that may exist that haven't been explored here, a third way, if you will. And I appreciate the language lab as a graduate of this district. I think I was one of the experimental guinea pig classes for the language lab, and I found it invaluable as an AP student studying Spanish. But and I get it, like it is what maybe we are used to and perhaps what works best over at Vernon Hills right now, in the opinion of some of our teachers. But if there is a way, this third way, perhaps, that we haven't quite conceived of, that still allows the functionality and capability with our technology, but somehow frees up space, somehow preserves perhaps an educator who can provide that functionality at a level maybe our language teachers don't have the capacity to provide, right? Maybe there's a creative solution that lies therein. And so I want to hear more. To me, this isn't very black and white. Actually, this appears to be kind of a gray situation, very much so to me. So thank you for providing that information.
Yesenia, what I would be looking for as we're going forward with this is looking at activities, skills, opportunities between these two models that are either available and no longer available. And if they are still available, how are they being implemented differently? I mean, we're getting into kind of programmatic stuff that is not really that's not our thing.
Yeah.
And that's
Right. And I think.
so I would rather look at more of the full picture and the broad picture of, are we offering those same opportunities? Because that's our job to
Yeah,
make sure.
To
that
be
we're
fair, I don't think we will be making any
changes.
big curricular decision-making. That's not our role.
Not our lane.
But I think it is important for us to be informed as to what's, what all the, the detail, not specific details, but enough of the details to feel comfortable that we're moving in the right direction and to be able to provide. I think, I keep coming back to these decisions were made based on data that was available at the time. I see a lot of different things. I've seen a lot, and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way either, but I've seen a lot of labs set up around desktop computers and stations and things that just don't exist anymore. I'm not saying that they aren't valuable and that they might not be the right thing for this, but there's technology changes, and this is a technology-based lab. And if there's something that, somebody can learn from and move on, it's not our job to make that choice. It's not our job to find those technologies, but it's our job to listen and try to support initiatives that might come out of this. So I guess, I'm encouraging the administration at both buildings just to take a step back and see if there's some things that we can do to make this a better situation, and learn from what we've done so far.
And I hope I wasn't getting too into the weeds with that commentary. I guess I'm not completely satisfied with what the current status of the language lab is based on that testimony we just heard at LHS either. That doesn't sound ideal. So are we trading down by eliminating do you know what I'm saying? It doesn't seem like we got.
Well, I think it would be really important to have Jenny Getch and Ray Alvin here to talk about the rationale behind the decision and all the supports that are in place. I don't think we knew the conversation was going to go in this direction, but they will definitely be present at the next conversation.
Great.
So we have time to make some decisions here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
just want to give some information. I'm Liz Sierra at VHHS. I teach AP Spanish. I just want to give you a little bit information about the Doc app that was referenced to. So this app is on the Chromebooks. It is in English and it just, basically it's an opportunity for the kids to record a sentence. There's no feedback provided. The kids don't speak to anyone in that reference. So it's just a test for the kids to practice what the test will be like in a 30-second recording. So it's just, how would I say, a tool to see if they're ready to practice pressing a button on their computer. So there's not much educational value in that application. It was just a way that Doc and the AP College Board created to test the kids during COVID, from my understanding as an AP teacher. So just to present that info.
Thank you. I definitely feel like that we are on the dance floor. We are not in the balcony. So I would like to move away from that. I'm not exactly sure how to go about doing it, but I still have not, I'm not satisfied with an answer about how the decision was made. It doesn't seem like anybody in this room was a part of that decision-making process, whether it's the administration or the teachers. So we
Right.
should have an idea.
I definitely think we have people in the room who were a part of those decisions. I think that when we're doing staffing and things like that, there are many decisions being made at the same time. And I think it would go to the improvement we see in record keeping, the kind of information that Bryant is sending to you now about these staffing decisions and why we're up and why we're down in areas. We're doing an excellent job of documenting the why, the what, and the how. I think during the pandemic, some of those same things weren't happening. And
Sure.
it was just, this was a decision. I think that I don't want to imply that there weren't very sound instructional things, because I think Jenny Getch is stellar at her job. And so until we have her voice in the room, I want to make sure that we're not assuming it was just money. I don't think that was the case at all. I think we saw that students could be successful without the lab, and that we might be able to use other technologies in its place. But I'd want to wait for us. It doesn't mean at this table, but we will definitely have that voice for all of you. So you feel comfortable that high quality instruction is being delivered to all students. That is your job.
Right.
Yeah.
I would like to add, though, that I am a firm believer that the curriculum experts in the building are the teachers in the classroom. And the teachers in the classroom are the ones who will make the decisions about how to teach whatever it is. My experience is with science, so I can speak to that. It's much better to have your own lab room than a shared lab space. But sometimes budgetary constraints make it so that you have to share a lab space. It's not ideal. I can't speak from a curriculum point whether this space is better, but if I have a majority of teacher teams saying that this is a thing that is valuable to them, then I think that the administration would listen to that, and then it would come to us to say, yes, we're going to approve that expense. But we would not get into the discussion about what's best there. We're not experts there. Teachers are the experts. So I appreciate that we've heard from teachers tonight. I just think that we kind of got behind this, like this conversation should have happened before somewhere else. And that what should have happened here was like cashing the check, saying, yes, this is what we need. We agree with you. And right now, I don't agree with the recommendation to get rid of the language lab. But I also don't feel like I have compelling evidence one way or another. I would turn that over to the teachers and their directors to figure that out and then come to us.
We have a teacher.
So,
Am I allowed to speak?
yes.
My name is Radhika Joshi, and I'm the one in the Vernon Hills Language Lab. I know we are comparing Libertyville teachers versus Vernon Hills teachers. I can speak to a couple of teachers who are commuters who are at Libertyville and who come to Vernon Hills. And those teachers, even though they don't have that opportunity to use the lab here, they come to the lab every single week. So they see a value in using the lab versus whatever model they have on their laptops.
Can you explain, how does an LHS teacher use the lab at Vernon Hills High School?
The commuting teachers.
They teach in both buildings.
I see.
We have a couple.
Understood. Thank you.
So that's what I want to add, that even for those teachers, it adds them one extra prep because they have to prep a class that they are teaching at Libertyville differently than how they would do the lab at Vernon Hills. They choose to add extra prep versus not using the lab. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Again, I'm sorry, just to Don's point that it's all helpful information, but we're not going to be the folks to make those detailed decisions. We're going to be expecting, others to be involved in that and or have been involved in that. We just haven't had the opportunity to gather all the information. So I think it's, while we're grateful for people to be here and share that information, that's a lot more information than I've had when I walked into tonight. This will be an ongoing conversation, and we're not going to be making those specific decisions about how to implement or what to implement or those kinds of things.
The only thing I want to add is I agree with everyone here. This doesn't seem like enough information for us to say this is the right thing to do or not. But I just wanted to share what I heard. It sounds like there is a technology challenge, there is a space challenge. From my point of view as a board member, if I had to approve something, it would be something that comes up for budget and making sure that our students are ultimately served. So whatever recommendation all of you come back with, I'd like to look at, if your example of the recommendation is to take away a lab, then what due diligence has been done to make sure that you have the same or better service when you look at technology, space, and all those things? And if the answer is, I couldn't find something that gives us, our kids, the same experience, when you look at software, hardware, space, what do you want them to achieve? Then we shouldn't be making that change. I think I'd like to see that assessment, and at the risk of opening a closed decision, I'd like to see that also being done for LHS. I mean, just because we made a decision before, if it's not working, I think we need to look at that. That's all I wanted to add on top of everything else here.
Anybody else have a comment? I suspect we're going to have much more conversation on this.
Maybe just to add the link to other conversations we're going to have tonight about one of the things that is in the board purview is to help us understand more clearly what we mean by equitable programs at both buildings, because this is an example of that. And both when we're adding things or we're reducing technology access, how can we fully implement what we said we believed in our equity policy about all students having equal access from classroom to classroom as well as school to school. And I see this as being something that wasn't fully considered at that time, since it's been different for 2 years. So.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Shall we move on to the next agenda item? It's our grading and assessment update.
Thank you. So I have with me Dr. John Gilliam and Mrs. Sam Phillips, who are part of the committee. We've started working on this in the fall. We've all the committee members participated in a virtual grading and assessment conference, a 2-day conference where we learned from experts such as Tom Guskey, Rick Wormerly, Ken O'Connor, and we've met a number of times. In the process, we've looked at what other districts are doing. We've looked at the shifts that were made, mostly to equidistant grading scales or to proficiency scales or elimination of the zeros. And as we were doing our research, we found that all of the experts suggest or recommend that we start with really taking a deep dive into our grading beliefs and developing a purpose as to what grading is in the district and identifying those guiding principles. And so that's the point where the committee is at now. We've identified a purpose, and at the next meeting, we hope to solidify those guiding principles. So tonight, we are here to ask for clarity around what the expectations for the policy for the spring. We do plan to have, like I said, the purpose, the guiding principles, and a number of recommendations to provide more consistency in grading. But we do know that this is going to require a significant paradigm shift in how each of us feels and about grading and assessment. It's something that is very personal to a lot of people, and we are going to have to facilitate this shift well. Anything you guys would like to add?
Do I think this is okay? I just think, yeah, some additional clarity around what you guys are looking for in a policy and what you would like to see be consistent and at what level. Because the conversations we've been having, a lot of the time we're talking about different content areas, different courses. We're looking at the difference between, you know, freshman literature and AP literature, right? And so the different assessment practices in those courses are going to necessitate different grading practices in different ways. And so just understanding what you're looking for as far as consistency would be helpful as we move forward in solidifying these beliefs.
Thank you for joining us, and hi, Sam.
Hi.
Welcome to the table.
Oh my gosh, it's a big one.
Well, Sam is doing this as part of her internship. She is working on her administrative license, so this is excellent experience for her.
It really is. Thank you for having.
I'll just make a quick comment, putting my educator hat on maybe for a little bit in terms of policy. So we're wanting to develop a policy. So there's a board policy, but there's also, I think we need to be very careful at what comes to the board policy level versus what's maybe an administrative procedure, so that we have the proper flexibility, so you don't have to come to the board to make adjustments to procedural decisions. That you know, it gives us all the flexibility to do that, because the board policy is really a very high level sort of philosophical document, if you will. So that's from my perspective, and having worked with policies for a lot of years, it's helpful to sort of put that lens on what gets in the actual policy versus what gets in more of an administrative procedure.
I understand what the committee is seeking, because there are different levels of specificity of grading and assessment policies from district to district. And so that was one of the things that I know they did look at, and having seen other schools who are trying to tackle this and not only get consistency, but consistency and fair and equitable grading. So both of those things, not just consistency of things that maybe aren't contributing to improve student learning, but different policies. Mundelein this last summer approved a comprehensive grading and assessment policy at the board level. And it was big picture about philosophy, about what we're assessing, what would count as evidence, what kind of consistency they wanted. And then the AR went into all the details about numbers or whatever might have been some of the things. But I know Stevenson also did some grading and assessment work in the last few years on their policy. Again, it's going from the policy being clear on expectations to then the implementation. And so I really appreciate the committee asking how broad or how refined do you think would be helpful for you? Because we are, as we received a few emails in the last few weeks about parents requesting us to have more guidelines on fair and equitable grading, because they are experiencing very different grading practices, even within the same class, let alone the message they might be receiving from a first period teacher who says, I don't have to grade homework, that homework is just practice. And then they go to their second period class, where they said, homework is really important. And the parents are saying, is homework important or is homework not important? And not that there's one right way, but I would want us to have a consistent way of talking about that. And I think that's what I'm hoping the committee can help find. But we want to make sure that when we looked at the policy last time, and it really only talks about that grades will be given, it doesn't say really anything else. So I think the policy as written right now is very sparse. So what would you feel would be a good next step? So that we went from sparse to more clarity, so that individual teachers, departments, and buildings can make sure that their practices are aligned to that.
See, and we thought we weren't going to talk policy tonight.
That's right. We were wrong.
So the policy that we're referring to is 6280, I believe.
Which is extremely vague. It's
It's-
like, yeah, we'll give grades.
Yeah.
And that's about it. But-
And we do that.
We do that.
Can we do that? Yeah. Again, I'll just reiterate that, you know, to try to keep it, the board policy level of it high and philosophical, but yet, you know, with enough framework to really guide the work that goes on underneath without unnecessarily restricting and having to come back and revisit it over and over. I would be curious to see some of the other policies that have, you know, you mentioned Mundelein. There's some other ones out there. I'm sure others are struggling with this. I know a lot of, especially high schools are struggling with this, trying to get this right. So I appreciate the effort. This is really, really, really challenging work. And so I think it's asking the right question, make sure we get it encapsulated in policy in the best way we can.
And do we address that at all in the student handbook?
There is a section in the student handbook, but I wouldn't say it's much more descriptive than board policy. It sort of just outlines the percentages, what they mean, and then sort of the letter grades during progress reports, and then the letter grades for the final semester grade, and that shift from the plus minus to just the whole letter grade. So it doesn't go far beyond that.
I see. That's helpful to know what we have in place in terms of policy and in the handbook.
It's more about the management of grades and
Okay.
less about any kind of philosophy. I think just to
Got it.
add, there's a couple dynamics at play. One, when we get a committee together, as we have, of a pretty wide range of stakeholders, from science teachers to language teachers to physical welfare like they all see grades differently. And we quickly realize that we get into the weeds when we start talking about behavior, for example, like, should you grade behavior? Well, that's pretty easy to tell a math teacher not to grade on behavior because what behaviors are present. But when you talk about a physical welfare class, when running daily to get your heart rate up is a behavior.
That's a skill.
Getting the heart rate up.
That is, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Sam has an example in her journalism class with teamwork, right? Like they have an editor and a group working together to develop stories and a news magazine. And so those teachers begin to talk about the nuances of behavior, skill or behavior, and what can I assess and what can't. A math teacher might say, well, homework is a kid's practice and we practice in class, but if they don't finish the practice, then can't I expect them to practice it? Those kinds of things. So we quickly get into the weeds. And just so you know, we started pretty early talking about the zeros and equidistant scales, which we can share a little bit more if you want. But and as Yesenia's memo states, we realized, like, first we got to lay a foundation of kind of our philosophy of what grading is, and that's what we're working on, and we feel good about that. But what we don't feel good about is once we identify some principles, is that going to be okay? I've heard Lisa talk a little bit about kind of taking what we're doing here and bringing it down to here. And we want to be true to that, but just looking for a little bit more guidance on what does here mean for you, so that we don't do this and you're like, no, we wanted it here, or you say, oh, we thought you were going to be here. So I don't know.
I mean, I can only speak for myself. I'm not interested in telling teachers, I'm not qualified to tell teachers how to evaluate homework in their class. You know, I don't want to get to that level of detail. I was thinking more along consistency between departments, making sure that all the math teachers were on the same page with how they handled things, and all the history teachers are on the same page with how they handled things. than I was trying to get into the weeds in specifics. I personally am not looking for that. I can't speak for my co-board members, but I think Jim put it best when we definitely want to make sure our teachers retain autonomy in how they grade, because that's their skill. That's what we are, that's why we have the awesome teachers we have, because they know how to do that.
And if I could just jump in and speak to at a department level, that consistency, that even gets challenging. I teach 3 different preps right now, and I have 3 different grading practice policies in my syllabi because of the different classes I teach. So I teach AP research, where students are working on a year-long process. And so my grading policy is either you demonstrate mastery or it's incomplete. I require them to redo, because everything that they're doing along the way is contributing to that final project, right? Any other class that wouldn't be appropriate, because that's not the model we're following. So to have a department level directive of how I need to grade, looking for that kind of consistency would be challenging, just based on the variety of students and classes I teach in a single day.
Okay, that's good feedback.
So is it really policy that we need to look at and maybe review other policies that are clearer before we give some direction? Because I do agree, I think we need to stay at the policy level and let the experts, handle the details. So is that where the conversation needs to start, at the policy level, for us to make ours better?
I think it would be helpful to see some examples, and maybe we'll find one that, no, we'll do something just like that. Maybe we'll create something out of a number of them. But I think whatever we decide, it will be an example of the level of detail and the level of information that we can then bring back to this committee and say, okay, what's missing? Or maybe they see this as a piece of their overall picture, and the rest of that picture needs to go in an administrative procedure or something, some other, type of documentation, or the student handbook, or whatever that might be. But I think it's, it doesn't hurt to borrow from others and learn what others have been doing in the same.
I think I
kind of
keep
thing.
coming back to our example of the difference between our protocols and what our beliefs were.
Mhm.
And I don't want to get into the protocols because that's not where we are. But I do want to have an eye to, I know we are preparing our students for any number of different paths that they choose to go, but many of our students choose to go to the next level in academia, and any policy we have should be reflective of what are they expected to see at this next level, and are we preparing them for that? So I think that is where I want to keep my eye for those students that do choose to move on. Have we prepared them for what it's going to look like at the next level? And I don't see continuity as, I don't see consistency and continuity as being identical, because that takes away from the autonomy of what's going on in our classroom, and our teachers have done that. So I don't think we need to have consistency where it's identical. And I don't want to be in that process, because I'm not working here every day. I want to keep up here with the goal of preparing our students for the next level, if that's what they choose to do.
Yeah, so we have to figure out how we're going to answer your question.
Yeah, it sounds like you would appreciate some models, not necessarily for the content, but to say, here's one broader policy. Here's a Goldilocks one, or here's a pretty detailed one, because we want the members of the committee to be authoring the content. I think I'm hearing like, what do you feel is broad enough to have teacher, the art and science of teaching be accounted for, but specific enough that as parents challenge us on some of the ways they're saying it shouldn't matter if I get you or you for a teacher, I should know that my students' work will be assessed in a very equitable way. That's what we're trying to find, is that sweet spot.
I have sort of, take a step back question, is what I thought this discussion was going to be versus what it is slightly different. So my question is going to be, what is the ultimate goal or deliverable, if you will, that will come out of this committee? Is it a board policy? Is it a board policy and your working protocol? Or it's only the working protocol? What's the actual outcome or what's the end product of this? Because I got lost
Well,
after this started.
from what I know, and
Yeah.
I appreciate Bryant, our historian, but during COVID, it required us to shift many of the grading practices that we had. And some of them were required by the state. We had no choice. And some of them were options that we said we needed to do because it was so remote and so challenging. So there was a committee that got together, Rita oversaw that committee, that tried to make some grading, it wasn't a policy, probably some protocols, consistent grading protocols, so student learning could be measured in an equitable way during the pandemic. When we came back from the pandemic, we had this list of protocols. And last year, Rita was working with the team to try and say, okay, makeups, we had them required before. Some of these things about some of the other grading practices, is our pandemic language going to continue? Is it not? When we looked to the policy, we saw that our policy is very, very thin in terms of giving guidance as to policy-wide. So we started this committee last spring, actually, and we said that was way too fast. We needed to slow down. And so we invited a lot more teachers to participate. So they have been meeting. I think what we're realizing now is we still haven't decided what is the product that would best serve all of our needs.
I think I'll try to take a crack at answering your specific question, and that is, this is a process that's going on, this grading practice. The committee, this work is being done, and what's being asked from us is to help support that work and the future outcomes of that work with a policy that more specifically addresses the work that they will complete in the philosophies that will come out of that. So I think, our policy right now is so vague, it really doesn't do much of anything. So I think it's important that once all that hard work is done and all those frameworks are developed, or however we deploy that we should have a strong policy that supports that in a way that really, gives it our blessing and our support for the work that they're doing. So I think it's a lot of different things, but the conversation here, and I think what we're being asked for is, how far do we go? We have a very vague policy now. What is our expectation of how deep do we go, and how much do we put within our policy? And I think I think it'll be an evolving process. I don't think that we could there's no way we can come up with a policy without really understanding what's going to be supported by that policy. But I also think that it's helpful to start looking at opportunities to learn from others and what they've done. I will make one additional comment in here. It says the committee was in the document for this section in this letter.
Can you send his memo?
Yeah, in the memo. It mentions the committee met to finalize a purpose statement. So when it's appropriate to see that will be very helpful, because that purpose statement, in my mind, would be one of those things that really needs to be in the policy. So it's that type of thing that should be outlined in the policy to support the work that's done in the district.
And one of the things, as schools say that they have a grading policy, they really don't have a grading. A lot of people use the term policy, but even if you look at Monoline, they have a grading policy, but it's not a policy. They have the same policy that we have in terms of grading. They call it a grading policy, but it's really their procedures that are in place, which include the grading scale, which include, some philosophy and so forth. So, when you start looking at schools, is it really a policy that was developed and adopted by the Board of Education, or is it a policy a policy, I'll use quotes, that is really a procedure and guidelines that were developed by teachers and administration that is in place. And, you know, the one thing, yes, we made changes from that we were forced through the pandemic, but we never changed our board policy. We changed our procedures that were, you know, went with it, and then we adapted our procedures or the way we graded after the pandemic and continuing to look at that. So if you change your board policy, that's, you know, set in stone, and that's what your guidelines are, that's what you have to do, and you can't, it's harder to make, you know, adaptations. The other thing is we have put an equity policy into place, which references, you know, some things with grading and assessment. So we have to make sure that we are being, you know, equitable in our grading and assessment practices, and that it also ties into our equity policy. But that piece of the equity policy is pretty vague too. It really doesn't define what that, it doesn't say what, you know, equitable grading practices are. But
So Brian, you brought up the equity, and I was kind of thinking the same thing. This is very similar to creating a policy. And although I wasn't a part of the process, I don't think the equity policy came from the start of the board coming down. It was a part of the committee coming up, and then the board kind of approved the policy. So I guess my question is it so, I mean, how is this process so much different than that process that it can't come as a recommendation from the committee of what you want to see the policy look like, as opposed to us doing the work? And it never works when it's the top down telling you what, I mean, I don't think so. So isn't it much more buy-in when it comes from the bottom up? So what is the barrier between of you coming to us with something that you've worked on?
And I'll just add that Kara just said everything I was trying to say more eloquently.
Sorry.
Because I've been struggling with what comes first. You know, us telling you go do this, or you saying here is the best practice, support us with your policy. That's kind of what I've read this memo 100 times and I can't figure out which direction is the best direction.
Yeah, I think we're all sort of saying the same thing. The work, the actual practices, the actual way we do things is going to come from the committee. And my, you know, comment earlier was, once we understand that, we need to be able to develop a policy collectively that supports that work.
The work.
Not describes that work, not dictates that work, but supports that work in the proper way. And I think really, I don't know, maybe I'm putting words into your mouth. What the question is how deep do we expect that policy to get? Because some of our policies get far more detailed than
Very
others.
detailed policies and very vague policies.
And this one is just like, there's no there. So I think it's a good question, but I agree. I think it's the actual work's going to be done within the policy. We're not here to decide how to do grading and what gets assessed and what doesn't get assessed and how those.
And I was involved on the equity policy development team. And it was exactly as you described. It came from the committee. The work came from, the recommendations came from the committee.
There was a lot of parent voice on that committee.
Sure.
And so that might be something else that we consider for this policy, because right now it's very skilled teachers who are serving on that committee. But I think that's one thing that set the equity policy committee apart, is that there were students and parents also sitting there, and they were some of the people who drove the commitment language and the metrics language. And so I think that might be one other thing for the committee to consider.
Well, and just to jump in and clarify, I think the reason that, at least the reason I'm here today asking some of these questions about what the board is asking is because from my perspective, and maybe I'm misinformed, what was told to me was the board wants a policy. Right, so that's what I'm responding to, is the board wants a policy. So I'm trying to say, okay, like what are we looking for here? Because I have teachers that are fearing a top-down policy, and I feel like I'm the one walking the line here, trying to make sure. So the words have been used to me several times. The board wants a policy, so I'm trying to figure out what the board is looking for.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, thank you.
I I don't know that we've ever had a conversation where we said we need a policy. I don't
Yeah,
remember
I
that
don't remember it
conversation.
I think we want a framework.
A
I think we
framework's
want
not
to
a bad idea.
become more aware of a framework, an educator generated framework. What works best for our educators and our students first and foremost.
So when the committee was formed, did you say, or were you given a directive?
Yes,
Or, okay, what was that directive?
to develop a policy that was going to provide more equitable and fair and consistent grading.
Okay,
I think we need to be careful with
Careful
the term
which- what-
policy.
Yeah.
Based on what Brian was just saying, because
when we
what
use the
you're
word
developing is
policy,
not a policy. A board policy is a very high level document.
The
develop
what
a-
versus the how, right?
Right, so I think that's where we're kind of like, we need clarity. It's like, because I think we can develop a policy with the purpose, just with the research we've done around what we believe as a district a grade represents. And those guiding principles, like here are the things that are going to guide how we grade and how we think about grading. And then I think when we're talking about everything else, those are administrative procedures. So I think that we can do a policy. I think the administrative procedures are what will take more time. And we will need, I do think more input from hopefully some families and some students. It's just that we thought that you wanted all of it now.
No, yeah, and I would say, and I think you've heard, we don't want to dictate what this looks like. We need your feedback, and we don't, and actually, if there's a chicken and an egg scenario here, we really need that, the content of what we're deciding to do before we can even create a policy, because that policy has to support what we're doing. It's not the policy dictating. We don't want the policy to dictate, because we don't want to make those decisions. It's got to come from the other direction. I think the analogy of the equity plan was a good one. So to answer that question, unless somebody else has a serious desire to do something different, I think we're interested in the work that the committee's doing and the results of that. And it will be, I'm living this myself. It'll be messy. It'll be complicated. It might not be finished for a long time, but it'll be finished in steps. We'll have certain things that we're able to implement and get going. And at some point in time, then we'll be able to step back and say, based on this, the statement that we're talking about and sort of the philosophical work that guided the work you're doing, then we'll be able to step back and say, okay, this is a policy that we feel, this is how we're going to change our policy. We already have a policy. And in reality, it supports what we do, but it just doesn't do it very well. So once we get a little deeper into that and we understand where this committee and where the district is going from a grassroots perspective, then I think we can develop a policy to support that.
An organic development. That's,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify, because the message has been, there's outside community pressure that we need to formulate
Well,
some sort of.
There is, I was just
There
gonna
is.
speak to that,
Okay,
and
that'd
if
be
you don't
helpful to hear.
mind, I don't know how it's going for the rest of you, but this is what I'm hearing like literally every day. My phone and my email are blowing up over this, so I'm getting a lot of external pressure from my constituents on deliverables sooner than later. And so I understand, like, haste makes waste. We don't want to do this in an unthoughtful or rushed way. We risk a lot by doing it that way. However, it sounds to me that there is some urgency within the community about getting this on a path to resolve. And I want to make the point that if we are honoring our equity policies, that time is of the essence. And to me, this seems like one of the top priorities for our district is figuring this out. For me personally, and just like putting on my educator hat for a moment, this is this would help me as an educator. And I'm again, only speaking for me as an educator, I would feel empowered by this and not that my autonomy was being taken. So for me, I would really truly appreciate kind of a map of where we're going with our itinerary and steps along the way. And then perhaps even some kind of loose timeline, because lately this is becoming a major conversation in the community, and we sit in places of governance. I feel indebted to answer the community.
And to add to what Kara was saying, this was one of the top strategic plan items too. And maybe I'm wondering if that's where you got it from, that you had to build, the board asked to build a policy. I'm just guessing here, but I think the problem to be solved is to have better, different, I don't know, put the adjective of choice, grading practices that are equitable and maybe as a parent or a student, more predictable to know if I'm in this class and if I do this, here's how the grading will be versus it being different from class 1 to class 2. That's the ultimate problem we're trying to solve.
And we don't want to be the ones.
We don't want to
"Hey,
tell
here-"
you how to do it.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
what do I know about grading?
And the pedagogy that serves learning is what you're going to tell us about. We're not going to try to determine that.
I think just to reiterate, like at a high level, it sounds like that kind of philosophical piece would be very possible. Definitely what we're on track to accomplish this year of like the purpose statement for grading, the set of beliefs that can govern our practices. But even from a perspective of like what happens in a math classroom versus what happens in an English classroom, like doing the same thing from class to class doesn't necessarily serve the learning from content area to content area.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
we'll
sense.
get into
That's
time
where,
frame.
Yeah,
like,
you're not going to get anybody here
okay, because
pushing
if you
back
want
on
me
that.
to do the same thing that my friends are doing in the math hallway, you know, it's two different learning processes. So a kid is going to go. from like
And
first
I
half
haven't
class
heard
to-
any expectation on the part of parents who've expressed concern that they expect the math grading policy to be the same as the English grading policy. But I do think we have some differing practices, and that's what's for the same things.
Yeah.
And students, our student school board reps are a perfect example of the student voice that has come to us saying, we don't know what to expect. We feel like there's such different expectations of our friends that are taking the same class but have a different teacher. And that's where the concern is, at least from the community that I've heard.
At
is that-
lunch today, that was like a highlight of our conversation. The kids were focused on that. Yes, Iman was there and so was Larry, and I think they can attest that came up pretty with a pretty substantial. Yeah,
But we don't
feeling.
expect us or students or parents to say what is the best pedagogy, what serves learning the best. That's where you're the experts.
But there is I think keeping timeline in mind is probably important. I mean, I'd like to see some kind of a roadmap, long-term, however it is, there might be some low-hanging fruit that, you know, is easy to accomplish, doesn't have a negative impact. Can we implement that? I'm just throwing it out there, don't go exactly, but can that be done in the next school year?
Start somewhere.
Right, start something somewhere, but then maybe you have more complex areas that you start, sort of think about pilots, you know, do you pilot by school, do you pilot by department? I mean, it could go so many different ways, but having some timeline that we can all sort of look at, even by the end of this school year, I think. Hope you guys can come up to that, so the family starting next school year has something to look at.
I think this is good.
Set
This
the
is,
expectation.
this is very helpful. So I'm hearing really, I think, three things. One, a timeline. Two, just to give you an update on where we are with kind of a purpose/philosophy. Three, I think I heard you say you wouldn't mind seeing some examples of what some schools are doing
Yep.
relative to
Yep.
policy. But then I've got a lot of nuggets that you've shared in terms of, you know, everything from not throwing away my autonomy, policy versus procedure framework that doesn't restrict. Those kinds of little nuggets are good for us as we start looking at what our practices might be underneath a broader policy. So I think we have.
Can I give you one more nugget?
Yeah.
I would hope that teacher teams have similar identical.
Yeah,
grade
so
books.
that's a great piece of this equity, right? And we've heard that several times, that student A who gets the, teacher B has a
Right.
totally different experience than student C with teacher D, right? It just.
We call it the twin effect.
The twin.
A parent
yeah,
has
right.
twins,
Yes.
two different classes, two different classrooms, but the same course,
Same course, different experience.
completely different expectations.
I got it.
I would also like to add with a view to the future, with the view to the next level. Our teachers are in the best position to know what our kids are expected as far as grading to the next level. And it needs to look similar.
So by next level, that's.
If they choose
second.
college, they
Yeah.
choose, whatever, what does it look like? 'Cause
Well,
we-
and can I add that it should be a logical progression. Our freshmen should
Right.
not be on a grading system that a college professor should use, but there should be a progression towards, if you're a freshman and this is what grading looks like, there'll be an iterative process getting to a senior who, whether or not they go on to post-secondary studies, are being evaluated the way that the expectation will change when they leave us.
So when you wrote clarity, I looked at that and tried to think, well, what you're going to be the experts that are examining this. What am I going to give you as clarity? Now, I do have some background, so as a group, I would hope that what you're doing is examining good grading practice. And then you're looking at what the peer-reviewed modern best practices and comparing that to what it is that we're doing. Looking for discrepancies. If we're doing exactly what best practices, we can be like, good job, and we can move on. And if we find discrepancies, then we would come up with a plan for improving whatever it is our grading practice is. Now, on several occasions, you said this would require a significant paradigm shift. I don't know what this is.
Sorry.
So is this, we're all going to go to standards-based grading? That would be a paradigm shift. That would be a mind blower, and it would take us a little while. Although Gusky would say that top down would be the best way to do it. We just implement it, we can get it done in 1 year and move on.
That's the only way to do that one, because like I said, like to have a stakeholder group of all the, you're never going to come to that consensus point.
Right. So if that's what this is, I'm not ready for that. And I don't think we are ready for that. I think, again, and I think we've said it several times, you are the experts. Find out what needs to be done, being responsive to the community. As Ms. Benjamin brought up, I think that you're on the right track. But as far as I'm concerned, I didn't come here tonight with a specified idea of what I expected you to tell us.
And I think we just wanted clarity on a policy that includes purpose and beliefs, or you want a detailed policy like the equity one that has metrics and when they're going to be delivered and all those things.
I would say at this point, don't worry about the policy. Do the work that you're doing, the good work that you're doing, and come up with those components, the procedures, the frameworks, the whatever you need to do. We will then step back and say, what policy can we craft to support that?
Okay.
It's.
Move
in my
away
mind,
from the
we-
word
we-
policy.
yeah,
You
yeah.
move away from the word policy. You
Yeah,
move
I wouldn't
towards
worry about
What's
that
the
at all.
framework? What's the procedure? What with your expertise, because that's what we're depending on. And
I don't
when
want
it
to
comes
develop a-
high level policy.
Yeah, I don't want
That
to
will
develop a
trickle down.
policy that restricts you. So if
Right.
if you were to tell me, we really like it, if we had a consensus, we really need a new policy and we got to do it now. It wouldn't be that much different than what we have. It wouldn't be
Right.
that much deeper because I would be afraid of,
Be the tail wagging the dog.
of constricting what capability we might have. So I wouldn't worry about policy right now. We're not pushing policy when people say we want a grading policy. that's not a board policy. What they're really saying is we want a better grading practice. We want better, we want to improve that. Yeah, framework, whatever you want to call that. So I wouldn't get hung up on the policy part. That'll come later.
Could I just offer maybe just some historical context? So I wasn't really involved with these conversations, but I was kind of next to them a little bit. And just for history, I think if you use the equity policy, the racial equity policy as an example, I think a lot of that came from a lot of people in our district, and it grew over years of people saying, there's something missing here. There's something that's not quite right. And they were working on it and then basically ended up coming to the conclusion that we need more oomph here. But it's going to take more than just a grassroots thing. And so, but the strongest thing that the organization can do, and the Board of Education that leads the organization, is to set a policy. That's the biggest thing you can do in this district. You can't create laws, but the policies are your laws, essentially. Now, policy can be scary, but policy is nothing more than the will of the board. Sometimes your will has to be what the state says your will has to be, but other times you have more flexibility. But in your flexibility, you can exert your will. I think when the racial equity policy was developed, there was this a balance of grassroots coming up and saying, we as a system, sometimes policy does restrict, but it's intentional. It's purposeful. It's meant to be purposeful. That we want you to focus in this area. And so I think similarly, what I've seen from the grading practices was under the umbrella of equitable grading practices. That's the thing that I heard for years being talked about, and talking about that, recognizing that there's something going on with grading that doesn't seem quite right. We need to figure it out, get to the bottom of it. And I think it's very logical that somewhere along the way, somebody thought, you know what? We have people that think this is important. The strongest thing the board can do is do it by policy. And so I think that's a natural, logical connection, that the strongest thing you can do is set a policy that will, the idea is to help improve and change the system. And so there's only so much you can do building that up and getting everybody to buy in. At some point, to make system changes, it requires a policy change. And sometimes we get that a lot of times at the state level. They will craft a law that was not on we had no interest in changing that, but we're then forced to. And so that just some historical context that I think.
No, that's a really good point.
Good perspective, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. And I was thinking of this process as you were speaking. And really once, we're going to get to a point where we've begun formulating our practices and our procedures and our framework of how we're going to do this with a good portion of our overall organization. But at some point in time, yes, we will need the policy to say, okay, this is the direction we're going. And to sort of validate that direction. And I think we will get there. I don't want that policy to be the driver of that, just like it was on the equity. It's like you build this to a certain point, and then to get it pushed even further, we have to sort of, formalize that through policy to say this, yes, we agree. We as a board agree that this is the direction we need to go to. So
but for the equity policy, we didn't write the policy until we had stakeholder input.
Right.
And it sounds like we're in the early stages of that with the administration and the teachers. But we crafted the policy further along in the process than we are right now. Although I think you make a very good point about the strongest thing that we can do is create policy. I'm just not hearing that we're ready to do that right now.
Because we don't have the framework.
You have our support to keep going.
Yeah. Go for it.
Go.
Yeah.
Do your work.
We appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Anything else on that? Yeah, thank you for your work.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Was that everything you imagined?
I should have you.
I watch from Zoom, so higher on live.
Okay. Okay, we're getting on. Next up, school calendar update.
Yes, so we met with the calendar committee. I don't remember who was that asked for an update. in response to the volley request. So we met with the calendar committee. Casey was there, Larry facilitated. We invited our feeder districts. We did have Dr. Hannigan from 73, right? He's from 73. The other 3 districts couldn't be present. And so we looked at what districts around us have moved to secular, which ones are still observing religious holidays. And then we polled everybody in the room, and the majority, 19 of folks in the room, would like to keep a religious calendar. And there was it 4, Larry? 4 folks that supported a move to secular. And so this is just an update as to where we are with the committee. I think we still will have to meet with the committee, reconvene them, and saying, okay, if we are going to continue with the religious calendar, what are the criteria? What is the threshold? How do we determine what, holiday or any day will then be in our calendar, will be honored and observed in our calendar? So that is something that we will have to follow up on and do that with the committee.
And that's going to be challenging because there
Yes.
will be unintended consequences of developing that policy.
Yes.
One other thing that, in looking at the information considered by the calendar committee, it was for the next year or 2, where several of the religious holidays fall on the weekend. So once you go 3 or 4 years
That's
out,
going to be a challenge.
it will make our school year much, much longer.
My understanding of, well, first of all, let me just say thank you to Mr. Vern and Dr. Sanchez for the great work they do on this. After sitting on the calendar committee for 10 years, I can unequivocally say it is a huge challenge to put this together and make it effective for all the stakeholders. So I appreciate that time. My understanding with the meeting was that we were looking at the 24-25 calendar when we said, do we want to stick with religious calendar versus secular calendar? Then saying we were going to put a objective way of looking at how we approach our calendar going forward. We need to have some way to make these decisions for the time when it comes that all religious holidays fall on school days. We're going to have an objective framework to look at some of this as groups come to us and ask us to help them with their religious observations. Keeping in mind, this is one thing that I can't state strongly enough. We will always support our students taking an excused absence to celebrate their religion and observe their religious beliefs. That is always available to our students. Yes, you may have work that you have to make up, when you come back, but we would never restrict anyone from observing their religious beliefs. But I definitely, I think in the wording of the memo, we may be a little premature saying that we don't see a trend of other schools in terms of how they observe their calendars, because what we didn't really look at was when did the schools that went to secular calendars, when did they do that? We don't have that data. So if we could maybe gather some of that data, that may help us really understand whether there's a trend out there, because if the list of schools that are on secular calendars have switched to them in the last 3 years, then that is a trend. And that is something to consider.
Yeah, so we will do that. Larry and I will email districts or call them up or read board minutes and all that to figure that out.
I appreciate that.
Is it more likely that secular calendars have just been in place for all time so far at many of these schools?
I really can't say. I can tell you that where I came from, it was a secular calendar when I got there. But I couldn't tell you when that change happened or if it happened or.
That's why we need the information.
I know, Dan, you were working at Lincolnshire when they made the change. So I think at different communities, it's come up at different times.
And I think it comes up more when you get into different pockets that have different prominent religious groups in their districts that, have different things. Some of these communities, I grew up in Zion. There was mostly like Christian, you know what I mean? So that matched up really well with the days off, right? So for that, a lot of that community. And so the communities end up being differently. And then particularly as those communities have shifted over the decades, that I think has prompted a ton of conversation. That's exactly what happened in Lincolnshire. Was the community shifted and it was different now. And now it's what do you do? And that's what that district went through that process and made their decision at that point.
So just an update, a comprehensive update of what was done. So we met as a calendar committee, and it included students from our various faith-based affinity groups to look at what we are currently observing as our holidays. As we all know, we currently observe a religious holiday, and I defined the religious holiday based on including Jewish holiday observances. So these schools were schools that did that as well. 128 is the only school that I was able to find that has a non-attendance day that aligns with Eid of schools in Illinois. We also looked at our feeder schools to determine families who have students in both 128 and in our elementary districts to see how our calendars align. And there's an even split between our 4 feeder schools. And so the calendar committee came together with one objective, one outcome for this particular meeting, and that was to determine whether we wanted to continue to observe a faith-based calendar or to consider a secular calendar. We did not look at the 2023-2024 school year calendar because that calendar had already been approved and published. And based on where we are in time, we felt that it would be appropriate to reserve those dates as they currently stand. Also, based on the idea that this discussion came from a presentation about Diwali, and in the 2023-2024 school year does fall on a weekend and would not be impacted by this particular school year. So for those reasons, we were intentional about not looking at 2023-2024. The second calendar that has been approved by the board was the 2024-2025 school year calendar, which is the calendar that we did look at. It is also published on our website. When the committee looked at this calendar, we met under certain constraints for examples that we looked at. It's important that we reiterate that these were examples or samples. It could be changed or manipulated in any way, but the constraints that were used in order to create these samples were maintaining the same start and end date for students and staff and maintaining the same total number of days for students and staff. We have yet to adopt any calendars beyond 2024, 2025. And so those are still open. When we looked at our secular options, based on what we currently have already approved, they would be removing Rosh Hashanah and Good Friday and Eid would be the 3 religious holidays that would be removed. When we looked at our faith-based calendars, we looked at continuing to observe Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Good Friday, Eid, and considering adding Diwali for that year. That's the poll that was taken from the stakeholders. Some of the feedback that was discussed in that meeting included the appreciation that our Muslim students felt for the addition of Eid in the school calendar, and also what students who presented the presentation for Diwali would feel if there was to be a change in the calendar they felt like it could be perceived as retribution for their presentation. And so we took a poll of all those present that included the members of the calendar and those who are not members of the calendar committee in attendance. So it was all in attendance for that. And that is the 19-4 vote that Yesenia referenced to continue to observe that holiday. With that being said, the discussion felt that it supported our daring mission, that a religious holiday supports our tenets of being aware, ensuring that we seek to understand the varied experiences and realities of others, as well as our global tenet that we value diversity. They also felt that it supported the District 128 racial equity, diversity, and inclusion policy that ensures that D128 schools are identity affirming environments where all students, their families, and the community feel safe, welcomed, and valued. The committee reported out that observances of a religious calendar supports and reinforces our core values as a district, which are embedded in our daring mission and racial diversity and inclusion policy. They felt that it was the fabric of who we are as a district, and that is a beautiful tapestry woven together by strands of various faiths, beliefs, and religions. It makes us better and stronger together. So those were the comments from that particular meeting, where they made that. Next steps, and again, so that meeting, the outcome was to determine which would be supported by or recommended by that committee. Next steps, if that is accepted, is that we would collect faith-based demographic data to determine what religious holidays are observed by our families, to establish the criteria then and thresholds of a district-wide holiday observance, and then to adopt operating procedures for adding district-wide religious observations to the school calendar. And we would use this identified curriculum to determine which holidays would be observed so that we would have a formal, objective, systematic, and standardized way of determining what holidays we observe as an organization.
And that's for calendars from 25, 26 and beyond.
24, 25.
24, 25,
Yeah.
we settled on, but in my mind, it was from 25, 26 on, we will use the framework that we develop to evaluate any further religious holidays and whether the ones we're currently taking meet those criteria.
Yeah, but so 23, 24 is next year. That's already been approved.
Correct.
And then the fall, we come back and relook at 24, 25 calendar.
But that was the one that we were discussing in that meeting.
As he was giving examples of
Yeah.
that one in the meeting.
Yeah,
So that
I mean-
people could see what it would look like if you went to a secular calendar or you went to, observing all the religious holidays. I think that it's hard for, I think it was hard though for the committee just to look at that 1 year, because there are examples like Dr. Herman said that, a couple of the religious holidays fall on the weekend. If all of the religious holidays fall during the week, plus you have an election day, and some of the other holidays, how do you fit that in? When one of the things was to keep that start date on that Monday and keep the ending date, on that Thursday before Memorial Day. How do you can do it, you take more days off, you might have to shift some of the other days that you take off.
It might meet up. And I guess that's the thing
Yeah.
that I don't think we fully considered.
Correct.
Is it more important to keep the starting and end date, or to have observance of religious holidays, or having a 2-week-long spring break or a winter break? All of those things are competing interests for when we don't have school and when we do have school. And so I appreciate, Casey, you saying that the committee felt good about the draft that we were able to arrive at. But even that, some of the drafts had the holidays on a Teacher Institute day and not on a day off. And that's a difference. And so how are we going to say which holidays go on Teacher Institute days? And they're usually fall when it's not really the most optimum time to have a Teacher Institute day. So I also, for pedagogical reasons, wouldn't want us to always think we have to have a religious holiday when we, excuse me, a teacher institute day that aligns with that. That's not necessarily setting our teachers and our administrators up for when their learning would be optimum in terms of getting prepared to implement something new, or somewhere halfway through where we're doing a reinforcement, whatever kind of learning that we need to do. I'm fearful that this plan could also be handcuffing us to putting teacher institutes with religious holidays. And I think that's not necessarily aligned with best practice.
The secular plan.
The religious.
No,
plan.
the religious plan.
And you also.
Slippery slope, man. I think personally, I'm in favor of honoring religious holidays and pushing out the school year. I say this as a religious minority. If we want to bring the holiday into question that I'm thinking of into question, we don't want to go there. That's silly. But like, that's a normal day for someone like me. I'll go to school. My kids will go to school. So honoring our equity policy, it's.
Well, since you said slippery slope, my question is, by setting a quantitative threshold, are we opening ourselves up to some legal scrutiny that we don't really want to be opening ourselves up to?
Yeah, because if it might imply that if you're minority enough, that your voice doesn't matter. And I don't think that's what we're trying to do here. So that's where the thresholds worry me a bit. And the other thing I wanted to point out is if you start aligning teacher institute days with religious holidays, then what happens to those teachers who are observing that faith? You're making them work when they really shouldn't be.
Right.
So I think that doesn't sound.
And
great either.
currently right now, maybe to answer that question, there are some days that we are in school and that teachers have their religion and they need to take that day off, and they are allowed to take days off for religious purposes. Obviously, again, it's difficult if that's your religion and you're not going to work. As a teacher, you're doing prep work for your religious day off. And sometimes that's difficult because you're trying to also honor your religion and have a day off. Students, same thing, they, according to board policy and state of Illinois, they can take religious days off. But again, and not be penalized. But again, that's difficult. They're not in school. And so, it's a balancing act of, how can we, honor all of that?
But I do recall when I wasn't at the, I think I was ill when the students made the presentation about Diwali, but when I watched the board thing, it was, yeah, we're in support of this, but make sure we have something for the next student group that comes and wants to present. And so what I hear us saying is, if it's not going to be quantitative data, what might we use as some guidelines?
How are we going to make those decisions?
Right, I don't know. And I think that actually is what prompted many districts to go from a religious to a secular calendar, is they didn't want to get in the role of saying this religion is more important than that religion. So I think.
My concern, and I'm sorry to come back to this, my concern is that the secular calendar honors one religion over all others. That's why I struggle with it. No one is asked to give up the holiday that happens to fall during that 2-week break on the secular calendar. No one ever.
Yeah, would the conversation be the same if that was 2 weeks in November?
Right. That's my sticking point.
Well, I mean, I understand that and I agree, and I want to respect that. But the bottom line is those 2 weeks in December is because the entire country is not really working and going to school. And how would we be offering our services and vendors and everything else that needs to happen to have school go on when you don't have the access to those vendors?
I get it completely, but principally.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, you got to recall, like, some of the reasons those are days off is because it's a legal school holiday in the Illinois school code. So we don't have a choice. And I'm not disagreeing with you of why it was called a legal school holiday, but it was. And it just has different legal weight when the state says this is a school holiday and
I-
other dates
Yeah,
aren't.
I get it completely. I'm just kind of devil's advocating right here. This is what, when you're of a minority faith, this is what goes through your head every time.
If we don't establish a framework of how we make those decisions going forward, though, we are going to run into a legal issue in terms of we have to meet certain instructional minutes.
For sure.
And we are at a point where we don't have days to give, and it doesn't do our community any service to not be honest about how we're going to make these decisions going forward and put some kind of framework around it. In trying to take some of the emotion out of it, we can find some ways to put metrics and make those decisions, because we are going to have to do that.
I support a framework entirely. I guess what I'm saying is, when it comes to Thursday before Memorial Day weekend, I don't see that as a hard cutoff for any particular reason. I don't see why that needs to be like something we stick to exclusively in the future going forward.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And, you know, speaking from the perspective of excused absences, which are always available, but my kids have never taken them because they miss too much in school, right? And I bet that's what happens with many other students who would like to celebrate, but they don't because the impact of not doing that is too high. So I think that's the other perspective. But yeah, I think if adding 2 days to the calendar makes it more equitable. But yeah,
it's
we
only
need to
2
have a
days
framework.
now.
I just caution on when we start looking at only 5% of students are, you know, whatever religion, that could get into a bit.
I mean, we have Ramadan, we have Kwanzaa, it's only 2 now, so where's the cutoff? I mean, I'm gonna be the.
Yeah, and I don't know what other metric you use.
And I wonder if there isn't some precedent that is being used by the 3, 6, 9, 10 others, peer districts that still have a religious calendar. Some of them are much bigger schools than us in areas with more diversity. So these metrics might have been established, and there could be some precedent that had been used for the establishment of them. So like we always say, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If there are other best practices in place that can guide how we develop a framework, then by all means, take a look at them.
But we're not being asked to do anything I want to go back
No,
to.
this is a conversation,
just a
an update from the
conversation.
committee and a conversation. So now we have ideas on some of the information we need to gather, and then what can be the focus for the committee's next meeting.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, thanks for everybody's input on that. Board self-evaluation.
Yeah, so I put this on the agenda in following up from conversations we had when we were writing our governance handbook. And one of the things that we put in our governance handbook was a goal to have an annual process by which we would, as a board, as a governance team, the 7 of you and 1 of me, reflect on how well we're aligning our practices to those governance principles. And then just any other things that we would want to say, are we using our time as effectively as possible? You know, just some of those things about meeting protocol versus the idea of, are we, following some of the protocols about putting things on the agenda. I'm just thinking of some things that we added that were new protocols that we want to get some feedback on. So now that we're sort of getting to the end of this school year, Lisa and I thought it would be appropriate to get some direction. I don't mind contacting the person or finding the right tool, but I didn't want to do that without the forward, like which depth of self-evaluation would you be comfortable with? There's some that are very, very granular, and there's some that are big picture, all from IASB or other tools. So they're all very reputable. I wanted to hear what the board had to say about that and how I can assist you.
Some of those tools focus really on meeting effectiveness. Maybe as a group, we decide, no, I don't know that we need to address meeting effectiveness, or maybe we do. maybe we want to talk about how how effective we are as a team or some other aspect of governance. But now would be the time for us to just sort of have a discussion about thoughts about how we choose what we're going to evaluate and how do we want to evaluate it?
This is perfect because I was gonna bring it up. We created this handbook with these protocols and we've been doing it and working it for a year. I would love to come back and revisit our protocols to see what's worked, what hasn't, and how would we change?
Yeah.
Because there are things to be a good board member. I have tried to faithfully follow our protocols and there are times where I've thought, I don't think we thought about this in practice and I'd like to revisit that.
Yeah, that's a
And
great point.
we designed it with that in mind, so we definitely have the space.
I'm not too sure we're
Do
gonna
that.
get a nice, neat, efficient tool to be able to do that. But I think carving out some time towards the end of the year, just to review, we just go down and
Yeah, I don't need an online
down the
tool.
list and
I
see
mean,
how it's working.
if that, our first evaluation is based on this product, how has it worked for us? I would be content with that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of work that went into that handbook and it's a great tool. So let's continue to evaluate it and make sure that if there's a way to make it better, we do that.
And equally as importantly, make us better.
Right.
By reflecting on the tool and using it
How we've
for,
been able to use it.
yeah.
Yep.
The only other thought I had was, that's actually a great idea, but, the strategic plan is sort of what, we've started going on. Should we evaluate ourselves on how well are we supporting the execution of that strategic plan? I think we should probably do that every year to make sure we are doing what we're supposed to meet that objective.
We'd have to develop a tool, right? Some kind of evaluation tool.
Yeah, some kind of rubric.
Yep. Can someone remind me, did we do this last year? Okay, so this is our first, our
Having
inaugural
no experience
evaluation.
with this, I'd be interested to see what tools the IASB has.
Same.
Okay. We can do that. Again, I think the idea of the local assessment we want to do is to our own governance handbook. But it sounds like we're also interested in few of the things that just high functioning boards regularly reflect on from IASB. So I can definitely pull together a few of those strands and then have that prepared for some board feedback, probably at the April meeting.
Okay. We're down to the future agenda items. Anyone have anything that they're interested in adding? to
Well,
the
I did,
future
but now I just brought it up.
Oh, there you go.
Has everyone, I don't know if this needs to be put on the agenda, but we will have to take a look at it by our next committee meeting, the student board rep interviews, selecting the student board reps for next year are coming up in April, and the buildings have graciously invited us to participate in those interviews. So I would encourage, if you haven't had a chance yet, please do look at that so that we can.
I did look at it. And they are all during a work day.
Yeah.
And not any weekend opportunities. Is that possible or this is set in stone?
So I don't want to speak for the buildings on that, but I think because we're dealing with students, we prefer to do it during the school day. Yes.
Yeah, it's a fair question, but I think it's almost impossible because our kids are so overly involved, like to try to single out a Saturday in which all of our current board reps who are involved in 6 different things, plus the 12 kids from each school that there's
I
just.
totally
no-
get it.
yeah,
I
so think
totally,
I
and I
expect-
looked at it and it's just not something that I think I can.
And you're not the only one. It is an extra activity. And when you took your oath of office that you have fulfilled very faithfully, it didn't not include taking off time from your paid employment in order to do extra activities. So that is 100% acceptable and understandable. So I appreciate your input on that. And I hope that you won't be
No.
disappointed if we're not able to accommodate.
Full faith.
Excellent. Okay. So by the next meeting, hopefully those of us that do have some flexibility with our work schedules,
What are you looking at me for?
I'm not looking at you. You are the only retired person on our board, but that's, neither here nor there. But you also travel more than any of us, so.
I can take one of the days. I was waiting to get
I can't do the
opportunity.
second day. 'cause I'll be out of town.
Here's
So
what I'll offer.
The 26th.
I'll raise you.
23. I was 26.
26th I can't do, and then there's one on the 20th, I think.
Vernon Hills is on the 26th and LHS is on the 20th.
Somewhere in there, yes.
I
The
can
week
look at my email.
before.
I was gonna offer to take LHS because I served in that role last year at Vernon Hills, and I would love to see what the process is like at LHS.
20th. So
But
I
yeah.
could do the 20th, but I can't do the 26th.
Okay. We can take it somewhat offline and figure it out, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I just
Okay.
wanted to be sure that we knew that by our next committee meeting, we will have had
Some
to
commitment.
decide who's participating. So.
Cool.
Anything else?
Just a few agenda items. I thought I saved my comments, but I can't get to it. Long day. Oh, no, I did. But we have a few ongoing activities. It would be nice to get like an update like you did with the calendar. I think you covered two, so someone was reading my mind when they put the agenda together. One was the grading. Second was calendar. Third is the community education. I know we kind of stopped the program here, but there was work going on to essentially find alternate ways of providing that service. So I'd like to get some kind of a periodic update on that.
Yes, I can give that in April.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then another one that was on my list was. I can't remember when, but there was some conversation about how do you handle programming for, I'm going to use the wrong words, but the remedial students. Am I using the right words? But it's the students who need help essentially are off in their own class. And there was some conversation about how do we, improve the experience for them. I'd like to kind of get an update on that, not right now, but I want to add some cadence to that.
Yeah, I definitely included that in one of my updates to the board back in December when it's about some data and some information, and we've been talking about that at the December, January, February, and March meeting now at all admin to try and say, what does this mean here? What data do we have to look at? What are these outside laws and regulations saying? So I think we have a lot of consensus now on a way we can move forward. And so I'll be happy to present that at the April meeting.
Is there a way that we could add just a list of these things? And then can figure out when we get periodic updates on them till that is actually closed, if you will.
Good idea.
Okay. Thanks.
Anything
I'll
else?
send an email if I remember more. Thank you.
Okay, shall we adjourn program and personnel? We need a couple minute
5-minute
bio
break,
break,
yeah.
whatever.
Let's do a 5-minute
Let's do
break.
5 minutes and then we'll be back.
8:17, I should today.
Program and Personnel Committee meeting adjourned. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next. Currently on break. Facilities and Finance Committee meeting up next.
The Facilities and Finance Committee meeting for Monday, March 13th. It started at 8:19. Let's start with the invitation for public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to please approach the podium? A reminder that we try to keep comments to 3 minutes.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, yes. Great. Good evening. My name is Wes Poland. I'm a District 128 resident residing in the Vernon Hills High School boundary. Before I begin, I want to thank the Board of Education for your dedication to our community and the students of District 128. I personally understand and appreciate your sacrifice to serve. Please accept my sincere thanks for advocating for our collective interest and making the difficult decisions necessary to prioritize student success for all students at both Libertyville High School and Vernon Hills High School. I'm here tonight to comment on inequity in our district, specifically graduation venues. The graduation ceremony for Libertyville High School is held at the Now Arena in Hoffman Estates, and students have access to unlimited tickets. The overall budget for this year's LHS graduation is $60,600 or $136.18 per student. The Vernon Hills High School graduation ceremony is held in the main gymnasium, and the students receive 4 tickets. The overall budget for this year's graduation is $10,300 or $27.76 per student. When looking at the 2 high schools, the district plans to spend $108.42 more per student at LHS than on the Vernon Hills High School students. Vernon Hills High School families needing additional tickets to attend graduation have to reach out to families or create in search of posts on social media in hopes of securing 1 or possibly 2 extra tickets from families not using all 4 of their tickets. The big event hosted by the District 128 Foundation for Learning and the Vernon Hills High School Cougar Athletic Boosters Bash capitalize on the demand for the Vernon Hills High School graduation tickets. At both events, families have the opportunity to bid on extra graduation tickets. All this is just for a chance that siblings, grandparents, step-parents, and special caregivers might be able to attend the milestone event in their student's life. When Vernon Hills High School opened its doors, graduation tickets were unlimited. As new housing developments were completed and more people moved into the Vernon Hills boundary, class sizes grew. Instead of securing a new graduation venue to accommodate the growing class sizes, the solution was and continues to be to take away tickets. I understand that the current D128 projections show a slight decline in the student population over the next 5 years. However, this reduction will not solve the graduation venue inequity. This inequity will only be rectified when Vernon Hills High School students receive the same number of graduation tickets as the Libertyville High School students. I want to repeat, I am not suggesting that LHS students receive fewer tickets or switch to a smaller graduation venue. The students and families at Vernon Hills High School should have the same access to graduation tickets and a similar graduation experience. After an in-person meeting with Dr. Herman on February 22nd and watching the board meeting on February 27th, I know several inequities exist between Vernon Hills High School and Libertyville High School. Fortunately, the graduation venue inequity is fairly straightforward and an uncomplicated one to remedy. The time to act is now, as the classes of 2024 and 2025 are quite large. The class of 2024 is approximately 400 students, which is only 27
You're
fewer
about
students.
3 minutes. If you could wrap your comments up, thank you.
27 fewer students than Libertyville class of 2024. Please do not waste valuable time conducting a survey
A survey isn't necessary to point out this apparent inequity. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing about how the district plans to make the Vernon Hills High School graduation experience more equitable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the discussion about graduation. I'd like to take just a second to make a couple quick comments before we enter into the discussion and the presentation. It's worth revisiting how we as a board operate. As a board, we employ the superintendent. We set policy and direction for the district. And as such, we empower our buildings to develop their own graduation plans. Typically, the board doesn't tell the buildings where to have their graduations. I've been on the board since 2018, and I can tell you it has never even come to us where we have told Vernon Hills that they can't spend money on graduation. So I just want to make that clear as we enter into this. You know, it's really never even been brought to us for approval. So it's worth noting that if we converse about this. So, any other comments, Denise?
No, I just wanted to say it was following the meeting I had with the parent, and then Kara also, I think, has had parents request that the board have a conversation about this, because I think although it hasn't come to the board before, I think that now that people understand the difference in investment, that now that the sunlight has hit this issue, it's something that is not a tiny difference, it's a sizable difference in terms of the monetary amount. And I think from many of the parents who contacted me, they just look at this as an opportunity to say, so what do we want it to be going forward? And I think, again, this isn't necessarily because it is becoming such a large public discussion. We definitely want to have your input on what you think would be wise. Again, you're representing the parents and the community and people like that. And this ceremony is for the students and their parents and the community. And so I think if ever you have an expertise, this would be one of the ways that you participate in graduation and you understand the importance of it to so many families. So I think that's why it's as a discussion item. It's been brought to our attention. We will be developing next year's budget. And I think how we develop budgets, we sort of roll things over. And we don't zero things out every year to year and say, is this still a good investment? So I don't think there's any intention that Libertyville tried to increase their budget spending and Vernon Hills was not. And I just think that we have traditions and we have ways of doing things, and sometimes they grow further and further apart. And I think that's the situation where we find ourselves now. And so the parents are asking our whole organization to consider this. And I think because it's such a sizable amount, you approve this contract. So you approve the contract for the Now Center. And so I think we wanted your input, since it's a sizable monetary difference in what your thinking is about that. And then I and the administrative team can definitely do the work we're hired to do in terms of implementing some of those things.
Well, I just want to say this has not heretofore been a financial decision. The way that we've arrived at the venue was not based on a monetary constraint. It was based on what the building designed. And because so much of the parent feedback has come to the board and not to the building, I counted as of tonight 11 emails that the board received that the building was not included on. I'd really like to put it back to the building to say, do we want to examine this? And then if you come back to us and say, hey, we either need money or we need some other kind of support so that more tickets are available. I think that's then when we jump in and when it's appropriate for us to set it. But in terms of the money, I mean, we're always open to if the administration comes to us with a recommendation to spend money and we agree with it, we're going to approve it. And I can think of very few examples of where we may have asked a lot of questions and we may have made some changes. But there haven't been examples of where the administration has come to us to approve a budgetary item and we've said no. So I think if the question is, are we open to considering the expense? Of course, we're open to considering the expense. I mean,
I think you don't know
Yes.
there's a problem until you know there's a problem.
Yeah.
I've only been on the board for now a year and a little bit.
Coming up on 2 years.
So until you know it's a problem, you don't know it's a problem. And we've never heard that it was an issue. And I almost had, I don't mean to, I do question it being termed an inequity because we didn't know there was a problem. So I don't, and when you say it's it's inequity, there's almost a sense of a purposefulness, and there was no purposefulness on this. I get that there was a lack of opportunity and it's not the same, but it was never presented as there being a problem with that. So now that we know there's a problem, if that is something that the building wants to change and come to us, I have no problem doing that. But I do have to say there are many Libertyville parents that I've also heard from that do not like going to arena. And it becomes a balancing of, am I going to choose the inconvenience of the travel to have the unlimited tickets versus I can't tell you how many times I have been asked, why can we not just have this here? And when we did have it the one time with COVID, I understand the parameters, but there was so much positive feedback. I hope you consider bringing graduation back. So I was a little bit surprised to see all of these emails come in because I didn't realize it was, I mean, that's ignorance on me because I've never asked. So now that we know there's a problem, I would absolutely be open if that is something that the building wants to do.
So I'm at the other end of the spectrum and having been here a long time.
At least you remember how many
The
years.
far end.
It
feels like a year.
To the equitable, what I think in some cases we confuse equal to equitable. We're not trying to be the same. And when the decision originally was made, I believe it was an equitable decision. I believe it was a decision made at that point in time based on the information we had, based on the feedback we had, based on the community we had at that point in time. I'll step back. I'm probably a pretty unique individual, at least with the people in this room, where I've had children go through these schools and I've attended graduation for my own offspring at both. I had a LHS graduate, I had two BHS graduates. I've attended both of these venues. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but I think if you talk to most high schools, they would say they would love to be able to have their graduation ceremony in their house, in their facility, if possible. That's not always possible. And it's typically a space constraint thing. So as you were saying, Cara, you know, that I like both. I have no preference, Vernon Hills ceremony versus Libertyville. I've attended many of both as a parent and as a board member. The venue at the Now Arena, it's great. Big, lots of technology, although we have a lot of technology that we bring as well. But it's a big, wide open, you can have as many tickets as you want. But it is a long way to drive. It is somewhat impersonal because you're so far away. I'm sad because while the LHS choir can sing, the orchestra cannot perform. So you hear a canned, track where the students and staff process and recess to. At Vernon Hills, it's home. Yes, it's very tight. You only have so many tickets, but the orchestra's back there playing. You hear our kids playing. it's in our house. It's they're both great ceremonies. You know, I like them both, but I can see that there's benefits to either one. And really, the moving off campus was a necessity, not necessarily a decision made to go to a better venue. I'm sure, you know, if we had a venue here in this building that could handle that, you know, there would be a lot of argument to bring it back home. But again, I think it was a decision made at that time with, you know, the best intentions. Does that mean that decisions should stay forever? I don't know. And that's not really our job to decide. It's up to the buildings. I know John probably has some comments here, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a historical perspective that, you know, neither one's better than the other. It's just different. It's different based on decisions made at that point in time.
And it's going to be impossible to make everybody happy either way. With that being said, do you have any thoughts you want to share?
No. I know that I don't mean to make light of it. It's interesting, you know, Carr said you don't know you have a problem until you know you have a problem. I feel the same way. I don't feel like there's a problem. I know I certainly listen to the comments and respect those comments for sure. Just a couple of things of clarity. One, we do offer unlimited tickets, but she's right. These last couple of years, we've only offered 4, well, take COVID out, 4 in-person gymnasium tickets, but everybody else who wants to come is welcome to sit in much more comfortable seats in the auditorium and watch the event streamed live. So I've had 4 kids graduate from the high school, and that's where my parents have sat. That's just the way we've done it. I have been at every Vernon Hills High School graduation, every one of them. Every one of them has been in the gymnasium. So this is really just a matter of tradition, how we do it. You know, it's not, there was never discussions about comparisons, and to Mr. Batson's point, like Dr. Batson's point, when, you know, I've also been in Libertyville graduations as a teacher at Libertyville, and when we were at Ravinia, and they just have always had that space crunch as to not be able to do it in their own gymnasium. And I don't want to speak for Dr. Calentes, but I know that there are inherently difficult things about moving a venue and inherently good things about the decision they've made to move. And obviously the big thing is tickets. I will say this, just from a school standpoint, you know, what I say to families is, of course, you have unlimited tickets. Yes, you know, the extras sit in the auditorium and watch. So there's that. I also say that we do ask students to turn in tickets to us for those that if I know, you know, I only have my mom and dad are coming and that's the only 2, then here's 2 tickets. And each year we get a handful. We're not getting hundreds back. I'll shoot straight there. I'm not saying that that's like the windfall of all tickets, but we do offer those back. I do know that there is kind of an active, hey, kind of this network of, does anybody have tickets the kids kind of do on their own? I will say this is my favorite part of our graduation is that we flank the ends of our rows. So if we have 15 rows of graduates with an aisle down the middle, on each half of that row, I have 2 faculty marshals. And the thing that's special about the Vernon Hills High School graduation is that our teaching staff is involved in graduation. They sit next to the kids and they celebrate with them. And as principal, that's a huge thing for me. And you know, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that I've polled our teachers to see how many would make that difficult drive out to Schaumburg or Hoffman Estates, wherever that is. All I have to do is look at Libertyville's numbers to see that that would diminish greatly. And to me, that would be, you know, kind of the greatest hit of that. We did plan an outdoor graduation, because that's been something that's been kicked around. And, you know, my entire principal life, I've heard principals say, don't do it. Don't do it. Because you can't imagine the stress that goes into, you know, watching the weather and wondering, and wait, is that a cloud or is that, what is that? And, you know, the Thor guard going off and all of that stuff. So, but we did it. We did it once. We decided to do it. It was over COVID. It was 2021. And man, we spent, you know, $10,000 to get the DJ, to set up extra speakers that we didn't have, and rented the chairs. And wouldn't you know, it stormed that entire day. And so we got stuck back in school with kind of a makeshift split schedule. It was, and I vowed at that moment, I will never do this again. So, you know, and of course, then Hawthorne literally graduated the next night on our field. It was like 70 in sunshine. It was gorgeous. So you just roll the dice on that. You know, with all due respect to the comments and the emails, like, I get it. I would never try to dismiss that or tell somebody that that's a bad argument, or your priorities are in the wrong place. Whatever. I would never say that, but I would point to the tradition of the high school, the way that we've made it work, the really good feeling that, you know, I honestly can't remember a parent coming up to me before, during, after graduation and complaining about it, or you know, questioning the decision. Not, and then maybe they are under their breath or whatever, you know, but so this idea of, you know, you don't have a problem until you have a problem. I still, from a school perspective, you know, don't feel like we have a problem. Lisa, you said pretty clearly, like, you can't please everybody. Not everybody's. If we move out to Hoffman, there will be people that are upset that we're doing that. You know, we've A, lost tradition, and B, you move the thing 20 miles away, and it's hard enough to get there on a Thursday night. So yeah, that's my voice at the.
I really appreciate everything you had to say, John, and I think it goes back to our example about what's the role of a policy from our P&P meeting, because one of the things that the board charged all of us to do was to look for inequities. And I don't think inequities ever imply intention. I think they almost always are more unconscious. But in the equity policy, it called for us to review any program and to seek these things out so that we could then, once we're aware, say, how do we want to proceed? And so I think you're going to be seeing things that we didn't even know were different. They're going to surface, and people are going to ask us, okay, now that you know about this inequity, now what's your action going to be? And I don't think we have a protocol established for John or the parents or other people who want us to reconsider doing something differently. We're treating every situation very differently. And I think that's normal when you're doing something new and for the first time. But I think it goes back to, we said we want this really loose grading policy, and that we're gonna sort of take some of the individual things as they come. This is an example of taking individual differences as they come and how hard it is to do that. So it goes back to, again, what's that sweet spot of not having a policy or expectations that are so tight that it's dictating things ahead of time that we don't even know. But why would we have a policy saying review and see that there's differences, and when we find them, we're not quite sure how to proceed? So I guess that's where I feel a little in a gray area of wanting to be able to advise John on how to proceed once these things are surfaced. Because as someone who came from a blended family, I think sometimes we are used to our old structures serving a fairly traditional family structure with a nuclear family where 4 tickets would be pretty sufficient for most families. We have so many blended families, and that's what I was reading in many of the parents who brought this to our attention, that the needs of our families are changing. And that's what they're asking us to reconsider. And so to me, that's what I see this issue about. It is about what is going to, how do parents or any group who feels that there's an inequity going to bring that to our attention so that we then have an opportunity to audit that or to say, is this still the right way to proceed?
I don't know if it's necessary to codify things to the minutia, such as graduation, but more of this kind of holistic approach where you're looking at things situation by situation as they come up. Could that right there could be codified into some kind of policy. But as for, just kind of the optics here, if graduation, if upgrading, or I don't want to call it upgrading, if changing the graduation venue at Vernon Hills is not cost prohibitive, the optics are really poor. And if you know anything kind of about district history, this kind of just echoes a lot of some of the, short straws that Vernon Hills kind of historically has felt that they've been given over the years. But, I realize there's no malintent whatsoever, and you guys make a beautiful graduation event over at the high school, and it is special, and so is Libertyville's, and I've had the privilege of attending both now. But short of saying, well, then let's bring LHS's home and put the overflow in the auditorium, I just don't know how we carry on this way, because now that we know what we know, going forward, it will look highly inequitable if we keep it this way from my vantage. This is a momentous occasion for many families, and I think it's particularly when we look at our demographics at Vernon Hills, it's a highly momentous occasion for many of our students and their families. And I'm not going to, pretend that the demographics at our 2 schools are the same. They're not. And people want to be together. People want to celebrate the achievements of their graduates. This is what we as a district work toward every single day, is producing graduates that are daring. And if we don't offer space for families to feel that they can celebrate that fully and with everyone that's important in that student's life in attendance, like our students over at LHS do have the opportunity to do, then I just don't think it's right by the community.
I would say at this point, I would need to know more of what the whole community is actually looking for, because 15 letters is a sample, but it does not speak for the whole community. So I agree. And if that is what the community wants, I do not see this as an inequity unless it is. And I don't think we have enough information to make that decision right now. And I don't see how you make a decision without knowing more. And if that is what the majority of the community is feeling.
I've been made aware. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I just cut you off.
Not at all.
Okay.
I had that feeling that it was just going this way.
I'm taking it back, Doug.
You go right ahead.
I've been made aware of a petition that's circulating currently, if that makes a difference. I've been pinged personally about this numerous times over the last few weeks. Again, sometimes when you don't know what you don't know and it comes to light, that's when you suddenly have movement that didn't exist before. And so, all it takes is some people who are aware and to spread awareness and to, inspire action in others to really get the ball rolling, so to speak. And I think that's what we're witnessing here. And I really appreciate that involvement from our community and their concern.
Can I just briefly echo Kara's comment, though, that we're not sure it's not equitable because we don't have enough information. And I would say people are maybe informed, but I think the understanding of the differences in the venues, the fact that their child that may have been involved in music doesn't get to perform, the fact that they have to drive 45 to 55 minutes to get there, the fact that they're hundreds of feet from their student and they have to watch them on the big screen because they're so far away. There's just, and I'm not defending one or the other. I'm just trying to point out there are differences between the two venues, and there are good things and there are bad things. And I think a number of people are thinking, oh, they get this, it costs more, must be better, isn't necessarily the case. It's just different.
I appreciate that. I worry. Again, if this isn't cost prohibitive and we're still saying no, and absolutely
I
not.
don't think
I don't
anybody's
think
saying.
anybody's saying no.
So I would not.
Oh, I mean, I'm just hypothetically, if it's kind of sounding like we're not moving in that direction, then it does start to creep into not equitable territory.
Yeah,
And-
I don't
John
think
came
anyone's
to us
saying.
right now and said, we really need to change this. I think that we would change it.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
I don't
and
think it's a
if
case
we-
of equity at all. I think it's a
Yeah.
case of preference. And I think John has stated his preference. I'm not exactly sure why we're still talking about it.
Well, and I think the difficulty, if I learned anything from COVID, is that we'll have a group of parents and they insist they represent the majority. And that may or may not be the case. But regardless of whether or not it's the case, the building and the administration and the board are ultimately left to make that decision. So I don't want to create everybody gets a vote and we're going to go with the highest vote getter, because that's not the best way to make the best decision. I'm not sure that doing nothing is the right way to go, though. I think if we're aware that there is there's some concern about this, then doing nothing is not really the answer. We have to do something. We have to look into it. I don't know what that protocol is, but I also don't think that it's our job to say how we're going to look into it, as long as there is a commitment that we are going to examine it and that the board is going to get an update on what data you decided to use, how you made a decision, what the decision is going forward. I'm not sure that we're in a position to
I don't
impose
think we have enough information.
what that's going to be.
Nor do I want to be looking at it through the lens of we spent this on this school, therefore we have to spend this on this school. That's
not how we've made decisions.
That's not how we
in
make
the past.
decisions, and has nothing to do with equity.
And let's put this in perspective. This is important, but this is not impacting student learning. There would be some urgency around this if there was a significant investment per student that was creating a different outcome in the classroom. That would be a different situation. We'd be having a different conversation. While this is important, let's just keep it in perspective.
Any other comments? Right. We'll look forward to an update on that. Moving on to bid recommendations, continuing our summer maintenance work, starting with LHS washrooms.
Yeah, so we received 2 bids for the washrooms. The low bid was Ephraim Carlson, $372,000. The estimate we had was $500,000, so this came in well under, which is great. And so, yeah, when you add in the design costs, the total cost for the project is going to be just under $400,000. So yeah, this brings our total for the summer capital to about 3.9 million, which is under the 4 million that we had estimated, back in, I always forget this date, January. Yeah. So we would recommend this to be approved at the,
Okay,
what month is it?
next
March board
Monday.
meeting.
Yeah, it's next Monday,
Mhm.
20th. All right, so that will come up for approval next week. Bid recommendation for the LHS asbestos abatement. In line with the washrooms.
Yep, so similarly, we have received two bids. A little bit was Colfax, 49,900. We estimated the total cost of that project would be about 75,000, so it's gonna end up being about 58,500, which is great. To an extent, I mean, like, we want it to be close to what we're estimating, so we're, the intention is not to have come in under budget a ton, but I'd rather be under than over.
Yes.
I'd
Well,
rather be
and
close to exact, but
in context, we say this quite frequently, but it bears repeating. When there is a disparity between what you estimate and what the bid actually winds up to be, whether it's less or more, you guys walk through the scope of the project with the respective bid winner and make sure that you're all on the same page. You do that every time to make sure that the numbers line up.
sometimes it comes in under, sometimes it comes in over.
Right.
We're hoping in aggregate it stays within what we're expecting, and so far it's working out.
Okay. So we'll see that up for approval next week. Moving on to D, LHS wheelchair lift replacement.
So this, we thought it was gonna be 50,000. The final quote came in 44,124. It's less than that, so this is not something that state law would require us to bid. So we're bringing it forward, and there's not many people that do this thing. So it's difficult to find wheelchair lift manufacturers that can create a lift to this commercial level that we're looking for. So we feel comfortable moving forward with this one. Yeah, and there'll be one I'm gonna mention in future agenda items too, so won't forget.
Okay. Is the wheelchair lift currently operational? Just out of curiosity.
Currently it is, but we are constantly repairing it.
Okay.
Over the last few years, we spent several $1,000s. And now parts are hard to get. Last year we had to replace a board on it. To get us through, and they were able to find us a used board to get us through. So yeah, it's past its useful life.
Okay, yeah, and it's costing us more money to keep repairing it, so this is an important one. Okay, again, we'll see that next week for approval. Moving on to item E, capital project prioritization, our ongoing process.
Yeah, I won't read through again what I wrote, so I'll just assume you've read it. So we're in the middle of a process that I think is going really well. And so our hope was to have a finalized prioritized list for today. That is not happening. So we missed that goal. However, I feel very comfortable with the check of getting this in April. I think it really was, I think the core of it was the committee going through the two test projects that were submitted, and the people that submitted them saying like, this needs to get changed. This is too much, and this is not quite what we really want. Everyone really agreed that that was the case. So we talked about changes. I think we have a very, what would you call it? A spelt option that kind of, it's this very, I think a good marriage of simplicity, but also detail and a process that gets us what we want to know quicker. And so we're looking forward to that. I'm getting projects. I just got another one submitted today, so we're getting more and more, and they'll be due, or then we can get as many as are submitted between now and Monday,
Okay.
a week from today. So
No, that's great. This is very important to have an objective way to review the capital projects that are necessary in our district, because there's never going to be enough money to do everything. We have to have a way to evaluate in an objective manner.
yeah,
how we
I mean,
proceed with those.
there's definitely subjectivity to it, but there's criteria associated with that, which I think hopefully removes some bias from the process and makes it look, it makes it a more fair process. With that though, I did want to touch on, we were asked about what's going on with Verici and the VTurk. And so part of that process, when we last went through with Verici, they kind of gave us an overall summary of where the whole township was in terms of different projects and ideas. And the sense I had at the time from us is, well, we need to figure out what's important to us. And so we need to see what comes out of this process to say, what is most important is a project that aligns to some of the things that Verici is looking at doing, is that the most important project for us? If it is, then that makes perfect sense to align ourselves with Verigy and move forward with those. But if it's not, let's say, it's something else that comes up that is a higher priority, then we wouldn't match up with Verigy. So I felt like I really feel that we need to get this process ironed out to figure out what is our priority, or what does the data show our priority is, and then see if there's connection with the things that they're interested in doing, or that's in their lane, I guess you could say, in terms of doing that. So that's really the update. Like they want to know too. Like, and I would love to tell them, but I don't have that information yet, just because we're not through this process. So that would be all the information I have right now.
Any comments or discussion?
I'm continually looking forward to trying to see if we can do some of those energy saving projects. So I did ask Dan to speak to this tonight. But I would actually like to see some of those projects on the capital plan at some point, because I keep looking through that capital plan and I don't see solar installation. I don't see lighting upgrades or any of the things that Verigy talked about. So right now, to me, those are still off somewhere. Like, they can't be a part of the process if they're not on the plan.
Well, and they're never getting onto the plan unless they get proposed.
I'm proposing that we put solar on our buildings.
Yeah, I know. So I'm just, the process is, so like, most of the stuff we have on our list is about health and safety issues that get brought up, or asset replacement. Like, that's gonna be where most of our things come from. And the rest is gonna be through this process. So it needs someone to submit the project through the process to do that. So I've already said that I'm gonna do the solar on Vernon Hills, but if there are other projects, or even, I don't know if there are other projects that the board wants submitted through this process now, or if you see what kind of comes and it says, I feel like something's missing. I'm not sure what you want to do. But I'm happy to do what the board wants.
Well, we did the lighting upgrade at Vernon Hills High School. I wonder if just putting it on the list to do at LHS,
Right.
whether or not it makes it through the priority matrix.
There was a project submitted.
Verigy suggested, like, I can't remember, it was an astronomical sum. It was like $13 million worth of projects that we obviously cannot pay for all of those. But some of those projects do pay us back. And so getting those projects, like, what's that balancing point? If we wait 10 years, then, and we save $100,000 a year, was it worth it to wait 10 years? So, and I don't have the answer for where that balancing point is, but I would like to see them on a schedule someplace so that they're in our minds.
Yeah, and I guess a little, as far as I'm concerned, a little clarity on. Obviously, those come from the building and from the district. But is it appropriate for the board to say, hey, I'd like to add solar, or I'd like to add composting, or I'd like to add a lighting upgrade? Is that appropriate for us?
Change the infrastructure for waste management, change infrastructure, superstructure for water management.
And those might not wind up rising to the top in any given year, but is that something that we're comfortable with doing? No?
Well, maybe not even that we request, but maybe we request, go back to the team and say, hey, can you just take a look down this entire list and tell me, do a first blush, what might be viable projects, what might be things that we should be doing, and make a recommendation of the things that you think are most appropriate based on your knowledge of the building, and maybe Mark could run down the list, maybe somebody else, but just to sort of take that list and parse it out to those things. Yeah, we can't do all 13 million, but there's probably things on there that we either could or should be doing, and just get them on the list. I mean, it's even if they wind up at the bottom each year, at least we know they're considered, and they're things that are of interest to at least some of the board members.
I also see two other things. I see, Don, this is one of your passions, and it's something that you know is something we want to model for our students. So not only is it important to you, you think that this is an important behavior and way we should model for our students in our community of being good stewards. So it's a pretty big picture thing. I think the other thing I'm hearing is who at the district is also advocating for this. And if you don't feel there's an advocate at the table, then that doesn't feel comfortable for you. I think the third thing that just popped into my mind is what Lisa said about how can we do touch points or gather that information from the board on things that, again, you're elected officials to represent, especially capital outlay needs. We're bringing the educational perspective and some other things, but I think this is an opportunity not for you to say this nitpicky thing, but I think we really need to be investing more money here or here or here. And that's, I think that's a natural part of it. How can we take when an individual board member makes an advocacy to say, is that what all of you want? I'm used to having that be some sort of a protocol we have so that it doesn't feel like one single board member's voice is asking for something that they might have the impetus. But once that is sort of surfaced, we then consider it and say, yes, and then we give me or Dan or whoever a directive to consider that particular input. Because I think right now it's feeling.
This conversation started in 2018 before I was elected to the board. I sat at committee meetings over there beforehand and listened. And we were, I think the board was moving that direction. And then COVID happened and things went crazy. But I mean, it's in my mind, we've been at this for almost 5 years now.
But we haven't had a process, and like Denise suggests.
Right.
Perhaps our process could be, if one of us has an idea, we put it on the agenda for committee, we discuss it as a group, and if there's consensus that this is something we're interested in, we give it to you, and then it makes it onto the list.
To be fair, I did ask it to be on the agenda a month ago and it's not on the agenda. So that process is apparently not working.
Yeah, no, that you're right about that, and that falls on me, and I apologize for that. That was that was short-sighted of me not to include it, so I apologize.
And I wouldn't even go as far as Denise, you mentioned, if we feel that there's something we want to invest in, I wouldn't even go that far as much as, I think, Don, what you're asking is get it on the list to be prioritized.
Right.
And the experts tell us if it's worth investing in, and then we'll take that feedback and move on appropriately. But if it's something that we've discussed and we say, oh, we think these are good projects we should be doing, but just never get around to talking about them or doing them, then maybe this new vetting process for capital projects, just put them on the list, see where they go. Maybe there's a couple that'll pop to the top.
I wouldn't even use the word prioritized. I would want them to tell me where it falls in the priority as far as where the matrix
that's my point.
is.
That's, we've raised the ideas, but we shouldn't be, that's what this whole new process is supposed to be doing.
My only thought, kind of going back to the original with Verigy, was, is there a way for us to say, when we are doing a project, can we tick off some of the boxes from an idea standpoint? For example, I'm looking at the bathroom here, right? We're remodeling bathrooms. Are there any ideas from the Verigy work that we can use when we remodel that bathroom? Like, you get more efficient lights, you get more efficient toilets, water systems, whatever it is. I mean, that way you're kind of inching towards that goal. Even if we can't afford doing the big project, can you add on maybe a small percentage and kind of move us in that direction for everything we do? It's the only other thing that came to mind.
We are following a philosophy, so all our new lighting is LED, lower efficiency, and our toilets are low volume flushing as well as our mechanisms, so we are following that footsteps in everything that we do with our projects.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Dennis, thank you.
I am. Well, we're putting $1 million roof on, like,
Right, exactly. So
in that $1 million roof, where we, and I think that we have talked to them about that. Is that the same roof that they're taking all the rocks off of?
Mhm.
Right, because we had that conversation with Verigy while we were up on that roof. If we were to put solar up here, would the new roof support that weight? So at least at some point that conversation occurred, because I don't know if you've seen this roof, but it has like river stones on top of it, thousands of pounds of river stones. Well, once that weight is gone, then we should surely be able to.
Yeah,
Put
the
solar on
existing
that.
roof set. Yeah, roof six, all the roofs at the existing roofs, except for ones we've done at Vernon Hills are called ballasted roofs, where it's just fastened around the edges. And you lay all the heavy stone. The theory was the stone keeps the sun off. Increases the life of the roof, but the more you walk on it, you know, they are round stones, but they're not all perfectly round. You know, the roofs do, they last a little bit longer. But now we take that ballasted weight off, so now it comes to, we have to have an engineer come in and check our trusses and our in sections of different sections of the building. Might be able to support it. Now, over the educational section, great chance. Over the main gyms, not so sure because of the span. We are reducing weight, but what is, you know, what is the difference? And what's the wind load?
Right.
Yeah, we
So-
can proceed with that, with the engineering. You know, in
Just
those
an Al's
cases.
point. While we were considering putting the $1 million roof on, were we considering the load that would go on if we were to put solar? Like, is that just a constant filter that we have? Anytime we make a decision about how we're going to proceed, that we look at what are the possibilities for
Yep.
So our
water savings for flushing toilets or whatever.
Our new roofs will be fully ballasted. They're done, they're glued down. So they, you know, it's a matter of if you want to put solar on there, it's a matter of, we just have to make the connections through the roof to fasten the solar and also get the electricity down in the building. So those can be modified, and obviously you want to do it on the roof, you know, the newest roofs that you can.
Right.
And I don't recall seeing when we reviewed that bid, if anything was if we asked that question.
Right. I don't know either.
And obviously in Vernon Hills, you know, Dan ensured, you know, Vernon Hills, the new gym addition is solar ready. It was, the roof was engineered to make sure they could handle the ballast and the weight of the solar panels.
So what I'm hearing is you are making those decisions through that lens as best you can.
As best you can, yes, in a new building that was all set and engineered, so we're ready. It could come down to how much solar can we put on the roof, depending on the truss size. You know, you might think, we could fill up this whole roof. Because of span, because of this, you can only fill, you know, do 3/4 of it or half of it. So, you know, that we'd have to work out when that, you know, when we come to that point, that'd be part of the engineering.
Well, we would definitely depend on you as the expert to help us understand our limitations when it comes to energy efficient modifications.
Limitations and possibilities.
Any other comments? Okay. Moving on to F, disposal of equipment. That will also come up for vote next week if anybody needs a tractor. Is it going cheap? Anything to say about that? No? Okay, that ends items for discussion. Moving on to future agenda items. It's like we have some budget calendar information in April. Some resolutions in May, as well as our Lake County indemnification agreement. Anything else to add?
Yeah, our intention is at the March board meeting, we actually got it but today,
Yeah, this morning.
the scoreboard, the pricing to replace the scoreboard at Vernon Hills, which
Okay.
is part of our summer capital. That's 54,822, and we were estimating 55, so it's
And is
close.
that a project
Pretty
that's
close.
running through the new matrix, the spelt new matrix?
Nope, so let me reframe back. So this list of projects that was developed over the winter and presented to the board in January. That was developed outside of this prioritization process. Because that process was not figured out yet. And so at that time, what I informed the board was, we agree that this process is important. However, it's not done yet. And so the ship still has to keep moving. We need to do projects for this summer. We are going to have to follow our same methodology last year of really Mark telling me what the projects need to be after looking at all the data that he looks at. So that's how we generated the list back in January. To answer your question, no, that's not part of it. This is part of a scheduled end of life replacement for the scoreboard.
Fair enough,
Effort.
understood.
You know,
Thank you.
We categorized our projects for the summer. We went over the list and we categorized them as either health and safety or asset preservation, end of useful life. For everything that we've got on our list.
So we'll see the scoreboard next week for vote as well.
For approval, yeah, it's through the co-op
It's
pricing, so it's over 50,000, so it requires bid, but through the co-op, it's already bid through that process, and so that'll come for approval. So letting you know that that'll be there. So you're not surprised. And then in terms of budget calendar, what I'll give you in April is a draft to hopefully have our fiscal 24 or have our budget done sooner than we ever have before. So we've got a lot of things in place to allow us to do that. We have a teacher contract, we've got a staffing plan. Almost all the staffing, we'll have the ESP next month, so we'll have a lot of things in place that fully equip us to be able to figure this out and get everything tied up sooner than we had before, which just helps everybody involved to kind of know, what's the plan for next year sooner rather than later. So I'm excited for that. And then we have some of our year-end transfers that I'll give you in due time.
Any other agenda items, future agenda items?
Sonal keeps pointing at you. Do you have an agenda
don't
item?
specifically, other than, our continued discussion that we just had, so that's. I'm not formally asking for us to put an agenda item on our next. Because Dan has informed us that he is working on the solar project and that will go on the list, and then it'll be something that I'll see next time the capital projects comes up.
Okay, well, that adjourns FNF at 9:16.